When time starts to run out on love, it's easy for even the strongest person to be led astray.
He was younger, attractive, and charismatic. She just fell hard for him.
This wasn't just a fling. She was in love with him.
And when forced to choose between right and wrong, the lines can blur in a dangerous way.
She didn't know if he was injured. She didn't know if he was dead.
This was a love triangle that turned deadly.
What would you do to keep the fantasy alive?
When we are in love, it's easy to become misguided.
She was lying to them the entire time.
She went into protection mode over the person she loved, and that's who she is.
May 28th, 2016, Omaha, Nebraska. The most populated city in the state, Omaha sits less than 10 miles from the border of Iowa.
It's the big city with the little city mentality. So the population is large, but everyone knows everyone. Everyone goes to the same places, does the same thing. We've created like this little culture hub of just friends and families and neighbors.
On this cool Saturday morning, around 2:30 a.m., while most residents are fast asleep, Omaha police receive an unexpected alert.
Omaha is equipped with something called ShotSpotter that immediately alerts the police that shots have been fired at any point. It is not throughout our whole city, however, it is in parts of the city that are sort of high crime and more likely to have gunfire. ShotSpotter goes off and all law enforcement knows that shots were fired and exactly where the shots were fired at. In this circumstance, there's one single gunshot on Lake Street.
Before officers can check it out, dispatchers receive a 911 call from the same location. On the line is an emotional 47-year-old woman named Deloma Curtis.
Deloma tells the dispatcher that someone just shot her boyfriend.
She didn't know if he was injured. She didn't know if he was dead. And she was hysterical on the phone with the police.
She says his name is Carlos Alonzo. Born on April 12, 1972, Carlos Alonzo was raised by a loving family.
Carlos Alonzo was very involved with his family. He checked on his family. He checked on his friends.
Carlos had 4 children, but by the age of 39, he had yet to find a lifelong partner in love.
Carlos wasn't very lucky in love, but he continued to look for someone to share his life with.
In 2015, Carlos found everything he was looking for when he met Deloma Curtis.
She was a 46-year-old woman, considerably older than him, but he fell for her very fast.
Just like Carlos, Deloma was known for her big heart from a young age.
Deloma grew up in a family that was pretty close-knit, pretty loving. She always took care of people. She was always pretty active in her community and in her neighborhood.
She was looked at as the protector. She had everyone's back.
She valued family. She valued relationships. She always wanted her own family. It was just something that was ingrained in her since she was a child.
At age 30, she met someone and decided to share her life.
She got married and started to pursue her dream of having a home and a family of her own.
Deloma was a lovely woman. She was active in her church. She was a devoted and dutiful wife.
Then in 2005, Deloma found a career she could embrace.
Deloma became a part of the Douglas County Correctional Facility. She was very excited about working in law enforcement.
Deloma really took pride in her job. She felt like she could really make a change by being a correctional officer.
It helped her to look out for people. It was an extension of who she was.
While Deloma's professional career was taking off, her marriage began to struggle.
She and her husband ended up separating, However, she did do her best to make the best of the situation. Even in the midst of her separation, DeLoma still believed in love and still wanted a chance at it.
After 16 years of marriage, she decided to put herself out there again. Her decision soon paid off when she met Carlos, a single father of 4.
Carlos and DeLoma clicked together very well because family resonated strongly with both of them.
That flame sparked immediately. She was excited to find love again, and they were excited to start their journey together.
After about a year of planning and building their relationship, they moved in together.
They were excited to be together and couldn't wait to see what came about.
Now DeLoma has called the Omaha police, saying someone shot Carlos.
Police quickly arrive on the scene and find a man laying on the sidewalk with a gunshot wound to his forehead. He's obviously deceased.
DeLoma was bent over Carlos, screaming his name.
Homicide investigators are called in to help process the scene.
Well, initially arriving, they're going to want to make sure the perimeter and the area is safe and that nobody's there to contaminate anything.
A search of the area yields no sign of the shooter.
There were not any other people in their residence at that time, or given the hour at 2:30 a.m., there weren't a number of people at the scene. It is very critical in those first minutes to get as much information as they can. And of course, part of that meant talking to DeLoma Curtis.
They lead DeLoma into the house, away from the crime scene, so they can find out exactly what she saw.
When detectives speak with DeLoma, she informs them that earlier that night, despite the late hour, she and Carlos were still awake.
DeLoma Curtis said that she was having trouble sleeping that night, and so for that reason, she was up making some popcorn, and she reported that Alonzo was just also awake listening to music.
DeLoma told police that around 2 a.m. she had gone to the bathroom.
That's when she heard dogs barking and a gunshot.
She went outside to look for Carlos, and that's when she found him lying on the sidewalk in a pool of his own blood, lifeless.
DeLoma told police that Carlos may have slipped outside while she was in the bathroom and may have come across the shooter.
She said when she found him that she called 911. She did not have her phone, and she grabbed his phone off his person and used his phone to call the authorities.
When questioned about possible enemies, DeLoma denies knowing anyone who would want her boyfriend dead.
She claimed that the relationship was great, that they didn't have any problems. She can't think of anyone who would want to hurt him.
There wasn't anything about Carlos Alonzo that made it obvious to the police who might have done this. There wasn't any obvious suspects in this particular case.
They search the home and find DeLoma's cell phone in her bedroom and collect it, along with Carlos's phone. Investigators then turn their attention to the crime scene for clues.
The Forensic Investigation Unit and detectives did find one .40 caliber casing from a Smith & Wesson, which was consistent with the fact that Carlos was shot one time.
They find no murder weapon or any other evidence at the scene.
Besides the one shell casing, there's really nothing else there. They just aren't sure what actually happened.
Initially, it was thought that this could have been a random act of violence, even a drive-by shooting.
Law enforcement canvasses the neighborhood and tries to talk to neighbors and anybody that might know anything about this crime.
That's when they discover their first big lead.
A neighbor tells them they may have seen the shooter.
In May 2016, after 47-year-old DeLoma Curtis called the Omaha, Nebraska police, they discover her live-in boyfriend, Carlos Alonzo, shot dead outside of their home.
Detectives just don't have much to go on after speaking with DeLoma and only finding one .40 caliber casing. So they canvassed the neighborhood, hoping someone saw or heard something.
Several neighbors say they do recall hearing a commotion.
A neighbor said that he heard DeLoma and Alonzo arguing earlier that evening, I think approximately around 1 a.m., which would have been about an hour and a half before this murder, and they were fighting over her phone.
Investigators thought this was odd since DeLoma never mentioned this, and she said her and Carlos got along fine.
Neighbors say that they woke up to the sound of the gunshot and also hearing the screams of DeLoma.
One neighbor says they looked out the window and may have seen the shooter.
This witness told police that they heard a gunshot around 2:30 a.m. and they also saw a person running.
They couldn't see them enough to make out a description, but said that it was a male and that he was running to a convenience store near the house.
Detectives head right over to that convenience store. They spoke with the manager there, and they actually end up getting a lucky break. Although the manager didn't see anything, they were told that they have surveillance cameras that covered the entire parking lot.
Law enforcement officers were able to get some surveillance from the nearby convenience store, and it was some pretty good surveillance.
That surveillance camera actually could see DeLoma's front door.
In the video, investigators see a black sedan that also happens to have a hubcap that's missing on the front passenger side.
The car backs into a parking space near the building at 2:21 a.m., shortly before the time of the murder.
You could see a man getting out of the car, going up.
The man that was exiting the car at the convenience store also matches exactly what the neighbors had said. 2 minutes later, the front door opens. 1 minute later, the door opens again and someone exits.
The shots happened, and then you could see the man coming back to that car.
Detectives watch as the suspect speeds away out of sight.
Unfortunately, the footage was just bad quality. They couldn't get a good look at the license plate number or identify the man's face.
Investigators released the details of the shooting to the public.
The police decide the best thing that they could do is to release the information that they do have so that they can see if they get anybody calling in with information on who this person is.
They also speak with Carlos's family to see if they might know who would want him dead.
Carlos's family was devastated by the news of his passing.
While no one knew exactly who did this to Carlos, one family member was able to give officers some crucial information.
Carlos's sister says, "Hey, DeLoma's got another boyfriend."
Apparently, Carlos had just found out about the affair a month ago, and tensions were high.
But they're not sure who the other man is or know anything about him.
It seems DeLoma's life with Carlos wasn't as picture perfect as she made it out to be.
This could possibly explain the argument the neighbors heard them have the night of the murder. Before they speak to her again, detectives pulled DeLoma's phone records, and they discovered that she had been texting back and forth with someone she saved in her phone as BJ. So investigators do a little digging to find out who this could be.
At the same time, police get a tip about the vehicle seen in the surveillance video.
The police do pretty quickly receive a call from an individual that said, "I know who this person is," by the description of the missing hubcap of the car.
Eventually, they were able to find the owner of the vehicle in those videos.
In 2024, the Omaha Police Department shared information that the crime rate in Omaha was the lowest that it has been in a long time. And a lot of that is due in part to community police relations and community partnerships. There are other cities in the United States that are actually working to model after Omaha when it comes to crime rates. But a lot of the times when crime does happen, it involves people who know each other most of the time. It's very rare that I have seen random acts of violence since I've been living in Omaha.
In the spring of 2016, Omaha, Nebraska police are investigating the murder of 40-year-old Carlos Alonzo, the boyfriend of Douglas County jailer Deloma Curtis.
In the beginning of this investigation, Ms. Curtis was acting the way you would expect. She was crying, she was upset. I don't think that there was anything about the way she was acting that would tip the law enforcement off to the fact that she might know a little more than she originally let on.
But now, investigators aren't so sure.
Neighbors reported hearing an argument between the couple an hour leading up to the murder. And now Carlos's family tell investigators that he had recently discovered his girlfriend had another boyfriend.
Detectives are also looking into someone named BJ on Deloma's cell phone that she had been texting with.
That's when they receive information about the car they saw on their surveillance footage.
Eventually, they were able to develop whose car that might be, and one of the distinct characteristics was that there was a hubcap missing. And ultimately, when they found the car involved, they were able to see that that hubcap was missing and know that that car was in fact the car that was caught on some of the surveillance.
The car belonged to an individual by the name of Lorraine Jones.
Detectives immediately bring her in for questioning.
She's able to tell them, yes, this is my vehicle, but I wasn't driving it, my boyfriend was driving it.
She says his name is Rolander Brown.
When she was interviewed, she did report that she was a girlfriend of Rolander Brown, and it wasn't unusual for her to loan her vehicle to him. I recall that she wasn't real specific about that evening, whether he had the car, but she did say that he was at her residence and she went to bed about 9 p.m. and he was there, and that in the morning when she woke up, that he was also there. Like, didn't know where he was during the crime, but point being, saw him at 9 o'clock and at night and saw him the next morning. She had no idea where he actually was at the time of that shooting.
Detectives ask her where he is now.
She was not able to give information to law enforcement about where he was at currently and said that she had not seen him in several days.
After speaking with Lorraine, investigators get a hit on the phone number of BJ found in Deloma's cell phone. And it's also Rolander Brown.
It's looking like this might be their shooter, and Deloma may somehow be involved in Carlos's murder.
What the police do with this information is they go back, they do a background check on Rolander Brown.
They discover that 26-year-old Rolander Brown had been incarcerated before for burglary in 2011.
He did have a criminal record and had stayed at the Douglas County Corrections in the past.
He happened to be incarcerated in the prison where Deloma was a correctional guard.
He had been released just 3 years prior in October 2012.
On May 31st, 2016, law enforcement did put a locate warrant out for Rolander Brown as he was developed as a suspect.
Detectives also subpoena his phone GPS records.
The Omaha Police Department were able to determine that his phone was in the area going to and from the homicide scene at the time of the homicide.
Later, they can see that Brown returned to his apartment through the phone records at 3:15 a.m.
Text messages tell investigators what they might be dealing with.
It was clear that Deloma and Rolander had been talking to each other via text messaging and that they had a romantic relationship. Looking at both phone records of Deloma Curtis and Rolander Brown is that the two of them were talking to each other the night of the homicide. And those texts went on for quite some time, about an hour and a half leading up to that homicide. In fact, Rolander Brown had tried to call Deloma, and those calls went unanswered. I believe there were 6 calls he made to her leading up to the homicide, and she did not answer them.
The last call was made at 2:23 a.m., shortly before Carlos was murdered.
They're wondering, do we have a love triangle here on our hands?
Armed with this information, it was clear to the police that Deloma Curtis had not been honest with them.
Detectives reach back out to Deloma.
They bring her in for a second round of questioning in hopes of getting the truth.
June 2016, Omaha, Nebraska. Omaha detectives suspect Rolander Brown in the murder of Carlos Alonzo and believe the victim's girlfriend, Deloma Curtis, may also be involved.
We looked at her phone and figured out she was talking to Rolander Brown.
Detectives discovered text messages for about an hour and a half leading up to the time of the murder.
According to the text, it appeared that there was some kind of relationship between Deloma and Rolander.
Detectives question if the murder was the result of a love triangle gone wrong. They decide to sit down again with Deloma.
They questioned her some more about what her relationship was with Rolander Brown. She wasn't completely forthright at first.
She shows no emotion. They don't sense anything. She just acts as if she has no idea what happened.
She stuck with her original story, but the more they pressed her, the more she opened up.
She did eventually admit that she had a relationship both with Alonzo for the past year and that she started a relationship with Rolander Brown, and that had been going on for a couple months.
Deloma tells investigators that she first met Rolander when he was sent to the prison she works at. Even though he was 20 years younger, he really won her over.
While the two only intended to be friends, they soon started to develop a strong romantic connection.
When Rolander was eventually released from the Douglas County Correctional Facility, he and Deloma stayed in contact.
Deloma tells investigators that at this point, her and Carlos are fighting a lot, so she leaned on Rolander, who was always there to support her. And soon this support made her see their relationship in a whole new light.
Deloma tells investigators that she loved Rolander. This wasn't just a fling. She was in love with him.
According to Deloma, Carlos soon found out, and their already struggling relationship got worse.
Over a month before the murder, Carlos and Deloma had been arguing like crazy. And then on May 28th, Carlos caught Deloma texting Rolander, and things escalated from there.
I think the whole deal was she was complaining about Carlos and their fighting. So she acknowledged to the police that she did know that Rolander was coming over, but denied that she had any idea that he was going to harm Carlos in any way.
Around 1 a.m., when Rolander kept calling Deloma, she says she couldn't respond.
The reason the phone calls go unanswered is because Carlos did take her phone.
When Deloma found Carlos dead, she was in shock. She couldn't believe it had gotten to this point.
Despite the heartbreak of losing her boyfriend, Deloma instead protected Rolander.
Seeing the man that she was supposed to spend the rest of her life with dead outside of their home, the first thought she had was to protect the person who committed the crime. She went into protection mode over the person she loved, and that's who she is.
Shockingly, she then admits that she used her position as a correctional officer to help him even more.
Deloma admitted to law enforcement that she used a police database that she had access to working at the corrections to learn that there was a locate warrant for Rolander Brown, and that she warned him about that locate warrant. The police were able to verify that. They could go into the system and see that, in fact, she had access to that information.
Deloma told Rolander about the specific officers that would be looking for him. She even helped him to escape Nebraska a few days after the murder.
Now the police are realizing that the whole time when they're trying to solve this crime, that Deloma has been lying to them the whole time. But she still refuses to give the police any information on his whereabouts.
Despite the fact that she was starting to come clean on the things that happened, she certainly didn't want to help the police find him. She, in fact, helped him get out of town and aided in that. At that point, police decided that they needed to arrest her for being an accessory to murder.
With this new information, detectives make another major move in their case.
On July 26, 2016, a warrant was issued for Rolanda Brown for first-degree murder, use of a weapon to commit a felony, and possession of a gun by a prohibited person.
Knowing now that Rolander has already skipped town, investigators know that finding him will be no easy task.
As is typical with warrants, particularly on violent crimes, the Metro Fugitive Task Force was used to help track him down.
At this point, there's no telling where he is or what he could do next.
July 26, 2016. Omaha investigators are on the hunt for Rolanda Brown for the murder of his girlfriend's live-in boyfriend, Carlos Alonso.
His girlfriend, Deloma Curtis, was charged with accessory to a felony for helping him to escape after he killed Carlos Alonso 2 months earlier.
Deloma still refuses to give up Rolander's whereabouts in order to protect him.
While the Metro Fugitive Task Force is still looking for Brown, detectives in the meantime are looking for more evidence to tighten up their case against the couple.
Soon, they uncover something vital.
In July of 2016, a man was arrested for unrelated charges. When he was arrested, he did tell law enforcement that he had information regarding this homicide.
His name is Jonas Miles, and he said that he's friends with Rolanda Brown and that he saw him on the night of the murder.
Police say in exchange for a bond reduction, Jonas Miles offers to give information on the murder of Carlos Alonso. They agreed to the deal, and that's when Miles told them his story.
He, in fact, sat down with law enforcement and gave some very specific details about this case.
He tells investigators that he lives in a house with a man named Michael Thomas.
He says Rolander called Michael around 2:30 in the morning wanting to come over.
In the early morning hours of May 28, 2016, Brown showed up to their home.
Miles says that's when he confessed.
According to Miles, he had just told him and Thomas that he had just come from the victim's home.
He told this man that he had gotten in an argument with Alonso and he had to put him down. And he also said one shot. That became important to us because, of course, that's exactly what happened at that scene. There was only one gun fired, one bullet that killed Carlos Alonso. He also told law enforcement that the gun Rolanda Brown had was a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson. He pulled that clip out and showed that he was missing one bullet, which also fit with our crime scene and that narrative.
To confirm what Miles was telling them, police checked Rolander's phone records. And it turns out that Rolander did call Michael Thomas at 2:25 and 2:26 a.m.
Rolanda Brown's phone put him at this man's house at the time he was describing Rolander was there.
Detectives believe Miles' story and that what he's telling them is checking out.
In exchange for his cooperation, we did give him a bond reduction so he could get out of jail pending resolution of his cases. If he agreed to testify truthfully in the trial against Rolanda Brown.
Hesitant to testify against his friend, Miles wavers back and forth on the deal before finally accepting it. 2 months later, investigators finally get the break they've been waiting for.
In September of 2016, the Metro Fugitive Task Force located Rolanda Brown.
They surround an apartment building right where he's been hiding out in Omaha.
While the task force was at the front door, Rolanda Brown was climbing out the second-story window and jumped out to try to escape, but he did not escape. They were able to capture him.
Rolander is arrested and charged.
Rolanda Brown was charged with first-degree murder. use of a weapon to commit a felony, and possession of a gun by a prohibited person.
Investigators try to speak with Brown, but he refuses to talk other than to say that he and DeLoma are innocent.
As prosecutors prepare for the upcoming trials, they decide to offer a deal to DeLoma.
Despite the fact that we had plenty of evidence at this point proving Rolanda Brown was guilty in this matter, we had the phone evidence, we had the surveillance video and statements of neighbors and different things like that, we still wanted to give DeLoma Curtis an opportunity to come clean with the truth. So we decided to give her an actual plea agreement, and the agreement was that if she agreed to testify against Rolanda Brown, that we would give her the opportunity to plead to a reduced charge of simply a misdemeanor false information.
DeLoma accepts the offer and is released on bond.
She did sign a plea agreement, and the plan was that at trial she would testify. The misdemeanor false information only carried up to a year in jail, and she would have probably received probation, frankly.
But when Rolander's trial is set to start in July 2017, DeLoma is nowhere to be found.
She gets cold feet and she decides, I'm not going to do this.
Prosecutors subpoenaed DeLoma Curtis, and she failed to appear, and a warrant was issued.
The question stands, is she going to show up and share the truth, or is she going to keep protecting her man?
DeLoma was just a victim of love, of misplaced love. That's what we know about her, that if she loves hard, she protects hard. It makes sense that she went all in and stood 10 toes down for the man that she loved. That is a trauma bond at its core. That is what happens when we don't process trauma correctly, when we don't heal and take care of ourselves. Our brain does strange things. And in this case, it led to murder.
Summer 2017, Omaha, Nebraska. Rolanda Brown is set to go to trial for the cold-blooded murder of Carlos Alonzo. Even with no murder weapon, prosecutors are confident because their star witness is DeLoma Curtis, the girlfriend of both men.
However, when trial came around, she was nowhere to be found, and a warrant was issued for her arrest.
The Metro Fugitive Task Force had to go out and look for her.
Despite Ms. Curtis not testifying, we were still able to present our evidence and explain to the jury what happened that night that Carlos Alonzo was gunned down. The story that we put forth to the jury was this was a love triangle that turned deadly.
They say that Carlos recently found out about the affair between DeLoma and Rolanda, and that caused a lot of fighting between the two of them. Neighbors even heard them fighting that night.
Carlos even took her phone away during the fight. And when DeLoma stopped responding to Rolanda after 1 a.m., he grabbed his gun.
They believe that Brown was fueling with jealousy, so he took his girlfriend's car and drove over to confront Carlos.
Based on the evidence from the surveillance video, it was apparent that Rolanda Brown arrived in his vehicle.
They say that Brown parked at the convenience store across the street and walked over to Carlos and DeLoma's home.
Prosecutors say since Carlos had DeLoma's phone, he knew Rolanda was coming to the house, so he went outside to confront him.
I don't think they argued much at all. There was also no evidence that there was any physical fight between the two. It did not appear from the evidence that he was there very long before he shot Carlos Alonzo. And he went quickly back to his car.
A few moments later, DeLoma found the body of her boyfriend after hearing the shot.
Instead of being horrified about what Rolanda had just done, DeLoma chose instead to help protect him. DeLoma Curtis was in a situation where she had been going through a divorce. She was in her middle age and still wanting love. She was caught between two different people, and as we see, the person that she seemed to love more is the one that she wanted to protect the most.
Her love seemed bigger than her logic and seemed bigger than her desire to get justice for Carlos.
DeLoma then came up with a cover story before calling the police and risked her career to help Rolander escape capture.
Even though it wasn't her to plan this murder, she was fully willing to help the person who did it not be brought to justice.
Despite the surveillance video, cell phone evidence, witness statements, and Jonas Miles's testimony, the defense still maintains that Rolander is not the shooter.
Rolander still pleads innocent, says that he is innocent, and DeLoma, his girlfriend, also had nothing to do with this crime.
The defense wasn't different than many defenses in this case. It's really about trying to show that there's reasonable doubt that the state doesn't have enough evidence. Part of the defense here was that the witness, who he confessed to, was not telling the truth. That what he was saying just so he could get out of jail. But in the end, the jury made the decision.
13 days later, Rolander Brown is convicted.
He was found guilty of a lesser-included offense of second-degree murder, use of a weapon to commit a felony, and possession of a gun by a prohibited person.
While they agreed that he was responsible for the murder of Carlos Alonso, they weren't convinced that the act was premeditated.
Rolander Brown was sentenced to 100 to 140 years in prison.
Then, on July 19, 2017, DeLoma Curtis was found in Iowa.
By the time DeLoma Curtis was arrested, it was too late for her to testify, and we did not honor the plea agreement for her to plead to a Class 1 misdemeanor. Once back in Omaha, she did enter a guilty plea to accessory to felony and was sentenced to 3 to 5 years in prison.
DeLoma will now see a correctional facility from a whole new perspective.
DeLoma was released on parole in September of 2019. However, despite the lessons learned, DeLoma is still not done protecting her boyfriend when he comes up for appeal.
When Ms. Curtis got released, she did want to provide additional information to the Douglas County Public Defender's Office. She was trying to give information to help Rolander Brown.
She tells them that she has more information related to the murder of Carlos Alonso that had not been shared before.
She testifies at Rolander's hearing for a new trial.
DeLoma gives a sworn statement that she actually saw her brother kill Carlos and not Rolander Brown.
However, she does admit that Rolander was there when it happened and that he took off right after.
DeLoma is adamant she's telling the truth, but the court isn't so quick to believe this new version of events.
Because of her previous lies and the fact that she admitted to loving Rolander, the court was hesitant to believe anything she was saying.
Rolander's appeal is denied. In the end, an innocent man lost his life, all because of misguided love.
For someone like DeLoma, who has always loved love and had the happy ending taken away from her, that can be devastating to someone, especially someone who's in their 40s. That alone leaves you vulnerable. Someone speaks the right love language, and next thing you know, you're in love.
Carlos lost his life essentially because of a relationship he had with DeLoma Curtis. It's not necessarily that DeLoma Curtis was the reason that he got shot. There was never anything about this case that suggested DeLoma Curtis was telling Rolander Brown to do this, that she was instigating this actual shooting. But when it happened, she was not willing to tell the truth. She was willing to protect the man who actually killed Carlos. And that's really the tragedy in all of this.
When you're an older woman always doing what's right, Falling for a young bad boy can feel electrifying. But when his passion pulls you down a dark road, will you choose what's right or protect him to the end?
Cold night. December air in Toronto cuts like a straight razor across skin. The year is 2005. Neon signs flicker over frost-crusted asphalt on Yonge Street, reflecting off dirty slush piled high along the curbs. The city is alive with the hum of traffic, holiday shoppers, and late-night commuters rushing home through the freezing gale. But inside a dimly lit side alley near the downtown core, time stops dead. A single, sharp crack shatters the muffled noise of the city, a solitary gunshot echoing off wet brick walls. Then silence. Heavy, suffocating, absolute silence. A shadow slips into the darkness, blending seamlessly with the winter fog, vanishing into the night as if he were never there at all. Minutes pass before a passerby stumbles upon the scene, breath condensing into white clouds, heart pounding against ribs. On the frozen concrete lies 32-year-old Marcus Vance, slumped against a rusted dumpster, snow turning crimson beneath his chest. No signs of a struggle.
No abri.
No wallet missing. Just a single bullet hole through the heart, executed with cold, surgical precision. The headline breaks across morning news outlets before the body even turns cold. Midnight execution in downtown Toronto. Gunman vanishes without a trace. Police cruisers seal off the block under blinking red and blue lights, throwing eerie shadows against the surrounding skyscrapers. Yellow crime scene tape flutters violently in the biting wind. Detectives scramble through the snow, searching for anything: a shell casing, a dropped weapon, a footprint, a stray drop of blood. Nothing. The shooter left behind zero physical evidence. No shell casing, meaning the killer likely used a revolver or caught the ejected brass before fleeing. No eyewitnesses willing to step forward in the dead of night. No security camera footage in an era before high-definition digital surveillance blanketed every square inch of the city. The crime scene is immaculate. It is the work of a phantom, a professional who knew exactly how to kill and disappear into the metropolis without leaving a single trace. The victim, Marcus Vance, was no career criminal. He was a quiet, respected financial analyst working for a mid-tier firm in Toronto's financial district. Friends described him as soft-spoken, dependable, and intensely private. He had no known debt, no history of drug involvement, no gang ties, and no bitter ex-partners seeking revenge. Why would someone want Marcus Vance dead? Why execute a man in broad daylight's shadow with such ruthless efficiency? The media seizes on the story instantly. Front-page headlines scream, "The Phantom Executioner, who killed Marcus Vance, fear on Toronto streets." The public demands answers, but homicide detectives find themselves staring into a void. Every lead turns into a dead end. Every interview yields the same response. Marcus was a good man. He didn't have enemies. But dead men don't end up in frozen alleys by accident. Someone wanted him gone, and someone paid a heavy price to ensure he never woke up. Day 2 of the investigation brings no breakthroughs. Detectives comb through Marcus Vance's phone records, bank statements, and work emails, searching for a hidden second life. Nothing suggests illicit activity. But then, a subtle anomaly catches the eye of lead investigator Detective Sergeant Raymond Miller. 3 days before the murder, Vance made a series of panicked phone calls to an unlisted number registered to a disposable burner phone. The calls lasted only seconds each. Was Vance being blackmailed? Was he in over his head in a secret dispute? Or had he stumbled upon something he was never meant to see? Miller presses the telecommunications provider for cell tower data, but in 2005, location tracking is rudimentary at best. The burner phone went dark the moment the shot was fired in the alley. The community is paralyzed by paranoia. If a clean-cut financial analyst can be executed in cold blood on a random Tuesday night, no one is safe. Rumors spread like wildfire through downtown coffee shops and corporate boardrooms. Was it a case of mistaken identity? A hitman targeting the wrong man? Or a cold calculated hit ordered from the highest floors of Toronto's financial elite? Detectives scour nearby garbage cans, street gutters, and sewer grates for half a mile around the crime scene. They sift through hundreds of pounds of frozen trash in search of a discarded glove, a mask, or a weapon. Nothing. The killer had planned his exit route down to the second, avoiding every known security camera along the perimeter of the downtown core. Weeks bleed into months. The initial hysteria fades from the daily headlines, replaced by new tragedies and breaking news. But inside the Toronto Police Homicide Squad, Marcus Vance's file remains open on Detective Miller's desk, gathering dust under the weight of unsolved cases. The investigative team is scaled back. Key leads dry up. The killer remains a ghost, walking the same streets as the victims, breathing the same winter air, entirely unpunished. The case cold freezes into one of Toronto's most haunting, unsolved mysteries, a ghost story whispered among veteran detectives in quiet barrooms late at night. Years pass. The file turns yellow at the edges. 2005 becomes 2010. 2010 becomes 2015. The world moves on. High-definition digital cameras replace grainy analog tape. Smartphones record every second of city life. Yet, in the dusty archives of cold case files, Marcus Vance's murder sits trapped in amber, waiting for a miracle that seems less likely with every passing year. The killer proved that a perfect crime could be committed in the heart of Canada's largest city. But what the phantom shooter didn't realize was that technology evolves, time never stops, and microscopic evidence, imperceptible to the human eye in 2005, can sit quietly waiting for its moment to speak. The turn of the decade brings a quiet revolution in forensic science. Touch DNA, advanced genetic genealogy, and hypersensitive bioinformatic matching begin dismantling cold cases thought to be unsolvable. In 2024, a newly formed cold case DNA initiative inside Toronto Police Service reopens case file 05-88912. The original physical evidence collected from Marcus Vance's clothing, specifically a microscopic fiber recovered from the back of his heavy woolen coat, where the killer briefly made physical contact to position him before pulling the trigger, is submitted for re-examination using cutting-edge vacuum extraction and single-cell sequencing. Against all odds, the lab isolates a partial, low-template DNA profile. It doesn't match any known offender in the National Criminal Database. The killer is not a convicted felon. He has no prior record on file. He is a ghost with a genetic signature, floating invisibly through society. But forensic geneticists don't stop there. They deploy investigative genetic genealogy, uploading the unknown profile to public genealogical databases, mapping out vast, branching family trees to isolate distant cousins, aunts, and grandfathers. Step by step, generation by generation, the science narrows down a list of thousands of potential relatives to a single family line residing in southern Ontario. Detectives begin covert surveillance on a short list of male suspects within that family tree. One name rises to the top: Arthur Joseph Pendleton, a 58-year-old former private security contractor living a quiet, unassuming life in the suburbs of Mississauga. Pendleton has no criminal record, no violent history, and no obvious connection to Marcus Vance. He lives alone, drives a mid-sized sedan, drinks his morning coffee at the same local diner, and blends seamlessly into the background of everyday life. To his neighbors, he is just an elderly man who keeps to himself. To cold case investigators, he is potentially the phantom executioner who walked away from a murder scene 19 years ago. The trap is set. Under strict secrecy, an undercover surveillance team follows Pendleton for 3 days, waiting for a single moment of carelessness. They need a pristine sample of his DNA to confirm the match without tipping him off. On a cold Tuesday morning in November 2024, Pendleton steps out of a coffee shop on Hurontario Street holding a disposable paper coffee cup. He takes a final sip, tosses the cup into a public trash receptacle near a bus stop, and walks away toward his vehicle. Seconds later, an undercover officer casually approaches the bin, seals the discarded coffee cup into a sterile evidence pouch, and transports it directly to the forensic lab under an unbroken chain of custody. The lab works around the clock. The genetic material extracted from the rim of that discarded paper cup is amplified, sequenced, and cross-referenced against the touch DNA recovered from Marcus Vance's coat in 2005. The result comes back with absolute mathematical certainty, a 1 in a trillion match. The ghost has a face. The perfect crime has collapsed under the weight of a single piece of trash. The revelation inside the forensic laboratory sends a jolt through the cold case unit. That single discarded paper coffee cup, plucked from a suburban trash bin, delivered what 19 years of traditional police work could not: an absolute mathematical lock. The microscopic biological signature left on the rim of that cup matched the low-template touch DNA retrieved from the woolen coat of Marcus Vance in the dark alley of December 2005. The statistical probability of a false match was 1 in over a trillion. Arthur Joseph Pendleton, a 58-year-old retired security consultant with no recorded criminal history, living quietly in Mississauga, was the phantom gunman who had executed a financial analyst in cold blood and vanished into the winter fog. The immediate imperative shifts from patient surveillance to rapid, surgical execution. Detective Sergeant Raymond Miller, now a senior commander in the Toronto Police Service Homicide Squad, convenes an emergency briefing in the tactical war room. The atmosphere is thick with adrenaline and suppressed tension. For nearly 2 decades, Miller had carried the yellowing file of Marcus Vance on his desk, a constant reminder of an unsolved tragedy that had defied every traditional investigative tool. Now, with the DNA match secured, the team prepares for the arrest phase. They are dealing with a man who demonstrated cold, ruthless precision in 2005, a man whose background in private security suggested advanced knowledge of counter-surveillance, firearm mechanics, and evasive tactics. There can be no mistakes, no leaked information, and no room for escape. Tactical teams position themselves around Pendleton's suburban residence on a quiet cul-de-sac in Mississauga before dawn. The neighborhood is asleep under a canopy of oak trees and glowing streetlights. At 6 o'clock sharp, heavily armed tactical officers execute a dynamic entry. The door hinges burst open under a battering ram, and flashbangs illuminate the front lawn in blinding, disorienting flashes. Within seconds, Pendleton is pinned to the hardwood floor of his living room, his arms cuffed behind his back, his face pressed against the rug. He does not scream. He does not struggle. He simply blinks into the darkness, his demeanor eerily calm, his expression devoid of shock or remorse. It is the reaction of a man who had spent 19 years waiting for a knock on the door that he knew might eventually come. News of the arrest sends shockwaves through the Toronto media landscape. Morning headlines burst across television screens, radio broadcasts, and digital feeds. 2005 cold case solved, discarded coffee cup unmasks alleyway gunman, justice for Marcus Vance after 19 years. The public is captivated by the dramatic convergence of cutting-edge forensic science and old-fashioned surveillance. How could a man live 19 years as a ghost, hiding in plain sight in the suburbs, only to be brought down by a single piece of discarded trash? Journalists rush to the courthouse as Pendleton is brought in for his initial arraignment, his head held low, flanked by armed guards, offering no answers to the shouting reporters lined up along the barricades. Inside the interrogation room at Toronto Police Headquarters, the air is cold and quiet. Detective Sergeant Miller sits across from Arthur Pendleton, a thick manila folder resting between them on the steel table. Inside that folder lies the complete history of the murder, the 2005 crime scene photos, the ballistic reports, the telecommunication logs, and the newly generated genetic sequence report. Miller begins the interview with steady, measured authority, pushing the photographs of 32-year-old Marcus Vance across the metal surface. Pendleton glances at the images with cold, detached eyes, remaining silent, his hands folded neatly in his lap, while his defense lawyer sits beside him, offering brief, formal objections to every line of questioning. Despite Pendleton's refusal to speak, the investigative machine works relentlessly behind the scenes. Armed with federal search warrants, forensic teams sweep Pendleton's Mississauga home, his personal vehicle, and a remote storage unit registered under a shell corporation in Hamilton. They tear through drywalls, floorboards, and ceiling tiles, seeking the physical evidence that would lock the case beyond any reasonable doubt. In the basement of his suburban home, behind a false panel built into a heavy wooden workbench, investigators discover a hidden, climate-controlled gun safe. Inside lies an array of unregistered firearms, tactical gear, and a pristine, vintage .38 Special Smith & Wesson revolver, the exact caliber and rifling profile used to execute Marcus Vance in the alley nearly 2 decades prior. The discovery of the murder weapon is a monumental breakthrough, but the central question remains shrouded in mystery. Why? What connected a respected 32-year-old financial analyst working in downtown Toronto to a former private security contractor operating out of the western suburbs? Was it a targeted hit commissioned by a third party? A personal vendetta kept hidden from friends and family? Or a dark, convoluted conspiracy that stretched into the upper corridors of corporate finance? Detectives launch a massive financial audit, sifting through 19 years of bank records, wire transfers, offshore accounts, and encrypted digital communications linked to Pendleton's security firm. As forensic accountants dig into the paper trail from 2005, they uncover a series of complex, structured cash payments made to a shell account managed by Pendleton in the months leading up to the murder. The origin of those funds traces back to an offshore entity tied to a major corporate auditing scandal that had shaken Toronto's financial district in late 2005. Marcus Vance, it turns out, was not just a quiet analyst. He was an internal whistleblower who had uncovered millions of dollars in systematic embezzlement and illegal wire transfers within his firm. Days before his murder, Vance had compiled an encrypted dossier detailing the fraud, intending to present it to federal regulatory authorities. Someone at the highest level of that financial institution had hired Arthur Pendleton to ensure that the dossier never saw the light of day. The narrative shifts from a random act of street violence to a cold, calculated corporate assassination. The realization sends chills through the investigative team. The murder of Marcus Vance was not a mugging gone wrong or a spontaneous argument. It was a professional contract killing, executed with terrifying efficiency to protect corrupt fortunes. The burner phone calls Vance made days before his death were panicked attempts to confront his blackmailers, unaware that his movements were already being tracked by a hired killer waiting in the shadows of downtown Toronto. With the motive exposed and the physical evidence secured, prosecutors construct an ironclad indictment against Arthur Pendleton. Charge sheets are filed: first-degree murder, possession of an unregistered firearm, and conspiracy to commit homicide. The legal battle ahead promises to be fierce, as defense attorneys prepare to challenge the admissibility of investigative genetic genealogy and the collection methods of the discarded coffee cup. But as the sun sets over the Toronto skyline, illuminating the very streets where Marcus Vance took his final breath, one undeniable truth stands clear. The wall of silence that protected a killer for 19 years has crumbled forever, shattered by the microscopic power of a single strand of DNA. The revelation of the corporate paper trail shifts the entire trajectory of the investigation, transforming a cold alleyway murder into a high-stakes conspiracy that reaches into the glass towers of Toronto's financial district. Inside the homicide war room at 40 College Street, whiteboards are covered in complex flowcharts connecting offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, shell corporations in Panama, and executive boardrooms on Bay Street directly to Arthur Joseph Pendleton's private security firm. The single bullet fired into Marcus Vance's chest on that freezing night in December 2005 was not an isolated act of random violence. It was a cold, calculated corporate execution designed to bury a multi-million-dollar whistleblowing scandal forever. Detectives from the Homicide Squad team up with specialized forensic accountants from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Financial Crime Unit to re-examine the encrypted dossier Marcus Vance had assembled in the weeks before his death. In 2005, Vance was a senior compliance analyst at Meridian Global Capital, a prominent investment firm managing billions in institutional assets. Deep within the firm's algorithmic trading logs, Vance had uncovered a sophisticated scheme of systematic embezzlement, artificial market manipulation, and secret wire transfers masking massive corporate losses. The internal fraud exceeded $80 million. Vance had compiled the evidence into a password-protected zip file, intending to deliver the physical drive to the Ontario Securities Commission on Friday, December 16, 2005. He was executed 48 hours before he could hand it over. The telecommunications logs from December 2005 now tell a far more sinister story. The panicked calls Vance made to the unlisted burner phone were not to a personal contact, but to an internal executive hotline at Meridian Global Capital. Vance had tried to give his superiors one final chance to come clean and self-report the fraud. Instead, that final phone call acted as a death warrant. Within hours of receiving Vance's ultimatum, a high-ranking executive at Meridian made an encrypted call to Pendleton's private security firm, activating a specialized contract aimed at asset protection and risk mitigation. The contract carried a clean, upfront payment of $200,000 in untraceable bearer bonds, deposited directly into Pendleton's offshore account. As news of the expanded corporate investigation breaks across national business networks, panic ripples through Toronto's financial elite. Headlines scream across the globe, Bay Street murder conspiracy uncovered, how a 2005 financial hit fell apart, the executive who hired a hitman. Shareholders demand emergency meetings, regulatory authorities freeze corporate accounts, and federal agents execute sweeping search warrants at the former headquarters of Meridian Global Capital. The squeaky clean image of Toronto's financial heart is shattered as former executives who had spent 19 years believing they were untouchable suddenly find themselves in the crosshairs of a major federal homicide indictment. In the interrogation room, Detective Sergeant Raymond Miller places the newly unsealed financial records directly on the metal table in front of Arthur Pendleton. Pendleton remains motionless, but the visible muscle twitch in his jaw betrays his composure. Miller lays out the narrative with quiet, relentless authority. The offshore transfers, the bearer bonds, the contract signed in the dark, and the corporate executives who paid him to pull the trigger. Miller leaned forward, his voice a low, steady rumble. They used you, Arthur. They paid you a fraction of their stolen millions to do their dirty work, and then they went back to their penthouse suites while you hid in Mississauga, looking over your shoulder for 19 years. Now the science has caught up with you, and those same executives are preparing to throw you to the wolves to save themselves. For the first time since his arrest, Pendleton's defense team shows signs of fracture. The evidence is overwhelming. Prosecutors present an ironclad mountain of proof. The touch DNA from the discarded coffee cup matching the microfiber from Vance's coat, the ballistic match between the recovered .38 special revolver and the bullet extracted from the victim's chest, and now the undeniable financial link connecting Pendleton to the corporate fraud Vance was trying to expose. Pendleton's lead defense attorney requests a recess, stepping into the hallway to confer with his client in private. The reality of a mandatory life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years hangs heavy over the room. Outside the courthouse, public interest reaches a fever pitch. A memorial of white lilies, candles, and framed photographs grows on the frozen pavement of the downtown alley where Marcus Vance lost his life 19 years ago. Friends, former colleagues, and ordinary citizens gather in the freezing cold to pay tribute to a young man whose moral courage cost him his life. Vance is no longer remembered simply as a tragic victim of a cold case, but as a hero who stood up to corporate corruption and refused to be bought. His legacy inspires fresh calls for sweeping legislative reforms to protect corporate whistleblowers and enforce harsher criminal penalties for white-collar crimes that escalate into violence. Meanwhile, federal prosecutors formally issue arrest warrants for 3 former senior executives of Meridian Global Capital, charging them with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and accessories after the fact. In a coordinated multi-city raid, tactical teams apprehend the former CEO, chief financial officer, and head of compliance at their waterfront mansions and private airport hangars. The men who had orchestrated the hit from the safety of executive suites are led away in handcuffs, flanked by armed federal agents, their faces broadcast across world news feeds. The narrative that had taken 19 years to uncover is finally complete, from the executive suite to the hitman's gun, and ultimately to a discarded paper coffee cup in a suburban trash can. As the pretrial hearings begin, Toronto Police Service holds an official press conference to present the complete timeline of case file 05-88912 to the public. Detective Sergeant Raymond Miller stands behind a bank of microphones, surrounded by the dedicated forensic geneticists, financial auditors, and cold case investigators who refuse to let Marcus Vance be forgotten. Miller looks straight into the news cameras and delivers a message that resonates far beyond the borders of Canada. To those who commit violent crimes and believe that time is on their side, know this. Science does not forget. Time does not erase your actions. No matter how deep you bury the truth, no matter how clean you think you left the scene, an answer is waiting for you down the road. This case was solved because a young man stood up for the truth in 2005, and because modern science gave that truth a voice in 2024. The battle now moves to the courtroom, where the legal validity of investigative genetic genealogy, touch DNA extraction, and cold case evidence preservation will face its ultimate judicial test. But as night falls over the city of Toronto, casting a warm glow across the skyline, the shadow that hung over the downtown alley for nearly 2 decades is permanently lifted. The ghost has been unmasked, the puppet masters brought to justice, and the immortal memory of Marcus Vance shines bright as an unextinguishable beacon of truth and courage. The news of the executive arrests reverberates through the global financial markets, sending shockwaves far beyond the borders of Canada. The sheer audacity of the crime, a major investment firm commissioning a cold-blooded hit on one of its own senior analysts to protect a $90 million fraudulent enterprise, captures the dark fascination of international media. Headlines scream across major global publications. The Bay Street murders, how corporate greed hired an assassin, the whistleblower who shook the financial world. The story is no longer just a local cold case. It has transformed into a sweeping legal and moral trial that puts the integrity of Canada's financial systems on display before the world. Inside the high-security courtrooms of the Superior Court of Justice in downtown Toronto, pre-trial motions begin under an overwhelming presence of domestic and international media. Defense attorneys representing Arthur Pendleton and the 3 indicted executives launch an aggressive, multi-pronged strategy aimed at dismantling the prosecution's central pillar of evidence, the investigative genetic genealogy, and the collection of the discarded coffee cup. The defense files a series of constitutional motions under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, arguing that the warrantless collection of Pendleton's discarded trash violated his fundamental right to privacy, and that uploading his touch DNA profile to public genealogy databases constituted an unlawful search and seizure. The courtroom is packed to capacity every morning. Specially assigned Crown prosecutors stand ready to defend the scientific and legal integrity of the investigation. They present expert witnesses, leading bioethicists, forensic geneticists, and constitutional scholars, who testify that abandoned trash in a public space carries no reasonable expectation of privacy under established law. Furthermore, they argue that investigative genetic genealogy does not invade personal privacy, but rather operates like a modern digital tip line, analyzing public familial relationships to narrow down suspect lists without exposing private health data. The high-stakes legal sparring lasts for weeks, with every argument dissected under the sharp scrutiny of presiding Justice Eleanor Vance, no relation to the victim, whose sharp rulings set historic precedents for future cold case prosecutions across the nation. While the legal battle rages in the courtroom, the forensic accounting team completes its deep dive audit into the inner workings of Meridian Global Capital as it existed in December 2005. The uncovered documents tell a tragic, harrowing story of Marcus Vance's final days. Vance had not stumbled upon the embezzlement scheme by accident. He had meticulously tracked it over 14 months, noticing tiny, microscopic discrepancies in trade settlement reports that had slipped past external auditors. Vance had kept detailed journals, hidden on an encrypted flash drive that he hid inside a hollowed-out vintage book in his apartment, a piece of evidence discovered during a secondary search by cold case investigators following the 2024 arrests. In these journals, Vance recorded his growing isolation, his anxiety, and his terrifying realization that his superiors were monitoring his emails and phone calls. One entry, dated December 12, 2005, just 4 days before his death, reads, "I know what they are doing. They think money can cover up any sin, that power makes them invincible. I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing." These words, read aloud in the courtroom by Crown prosecutors, bring tears to the eyes of Vance's elderly mother and sister sitting in the front gallery. The words strip away the cold, clinical nature of forensic science and lay bare the profound moral courage of a young man who paid the ultimate price for standing up for what was right. Back in the interrogation facilities, the united front between Arthur Pendleton and the corporate executives begins to crack under the relentless weight of incoming evidence. Realizing that the prosecution's case against him is virtually airtight, backed by the touch DNA match, the ballistic confirmation on the recovered .38 special revolver, and the unbroken paper trail of offshore bearer bonds, Pendleton's defense team approaches the Crown with an offer. Pendleton agrees to sign a full, detailed confession and testify against the former executives of Meridian Global Capital in exchange for serving his mandatory life sentence in a medium-security facility with protective custody status, avoiding the brutal conditions of a maximum-security prison where a hired killer would face constant threats to his life. The Crown accepts the deal under strict conditions. Pendleton must provide an exhaustive, minute-by-minute account of the conspiracy, from the moment he received the contract to the moment he threw away his clothes and weapon, ensuring that every corporate conspirator is locked behind bars for life. In a recorded deposition that sends chills through the legal team, Pendleton sits before video cameras and recounts the execution with chilling, unfeeling precision. He describes how he stalked Vance for 2 weeks, studying his habits, his commute, and his preferred routes home through downtown Toronto. He details how he waited in the freezing dark of the side alley on December 16, 2005, wearing leather gloves and a thick collar to hide his face, stepping out from behind a dumpster the moment Vance walked past. Pendleton recalls the final seconds with eerie clarity. I called his name softly. He stopped and turned around. He didn't look angry. He looked exhausted, like he already knew why I was standing there. I grabbed his shoulder with my left hand to stabilize him. That must have been when his coat picked up my skin cells, raised the revolver with my right, and pulled the trigger once. He went down instantly. I didn't search him. I didn't take his money. I just walked out the other side of the alley, caught a bus at the corner, and went home to watch the news. It was just a job. Hearing the killer describe the cold murder of Marcus Vance as just a job sends a wave of disgust through the courtroom when the tape is played during pre-trial hearings, destroying any remaining shreds of sympathy for the shooter or the corporate elite who paid him. With Pendleton's sworn testimony secured and the physical evidence validated by the court, the legal armor protecting the 3 former executives dissolves completely. Seeing that their hitman has flipped and that their financial records are fully laid bare, the corporate conspirators surrender their legal challenges. In a series of dramatic plea hearings that dominate national headlines, the former CEO, CFO, and head of compliance plead guilty to charges of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and accessories to homicide, receiving sentences ranging from 20 to 25 years without parole. Arthur Pendleton is formally sentenced to life imprisonment with no eligibility for parole for 25 years, ensuring he will spend his remaining days behind bars. Outside the Superior Court of Justice, a massive crowd of journalists, citizens, and whistleblowers gathers in the crisp afternoon air. Detective Sergeant Raymond Miller steps up to the podium alongside Marcus Vance's family. The 19-year ordeal, defined by icy dead ends, haunting questions, and a cold night in 2005, has arrived at an absolute, unshakable conclusion. Miller looks out at the gathered crowd, his voice firm and filled with emotion. 19 years ago, someone thought they could execute an innocent man in a quiet alley and buy silence with stolen millions. They thought time would erase their crime. They thought a discarded cup in a trash bin was worthless paper. But justice has an immortal memory. Science gave a voice to Marcus Vance, and today, that voice brought down an entire empire of greed. In the months following the trial, the Ontario government passes the Marcus Vance Whistleblower and Cold Case Protection Act, establishing groundbreaking legal shields for financial whistleblowers and guaranteeing permanent funding for investigative genetic genealogy in historical homicides across Canada. In downtown Toronto, the alley where Vance lost his life is officially renamed Vance Way, featuring a permanent bronze memorial dedicated to corporate truth, courage, and integrity. Fresh white flowers line the stone plaque every single day, placed by commuters, analysts, and ordinary citizens who pass by to remember the young man who stood firm against corrupt power. The 2005 Toronto cold case stands as an immortal benchmark in the history of international law enforcement, a testament to the fact that no matter how much time passes, no matter how deep a secret is buried, and no matter how powerful the perpetrators may be, the light of truth will always break through the darkest night. The paper coffee cup, discarded on a suburban street, pulled back the curtain on a phantom killer, unmasked a network of corporate corruption, and brought eternal peace to the memory of Marcus Vance. The reverberations of the trial ripple through the legal, financial, and law enforcement sectors for years to come, setting unprecedented global benchmarks for the prosecution of historical corporate homicides. The conviction of Arthur Joseph Pendleton alongside the high-ranking executive board of Meridian Global Capital signals a monumental paradigm shift. No longer could executive status, offshore wealth, or decades of passage shield those who utilize violence to enforce corporate silence. Across North America, regulatory commissions, forensic crime laboratories, and homicide squads restructure their operational guidelines to incorporate the lessons learned from Case File 05-88912. The narrative of Marcus Vance transitions from a tragic, unresolved mystery into an enduring international masterclass on moral courage, scientific innovation, and systemic accountability. At the Toronto Police Service headquarters, the newly dedicated Forensic Genetic Genealogy and Cold Case Unit operates under expanded provincial funding granted directly by the Marcus Vance Whistleblower and Cold Case Protection Act. Specialized analysts and bioinformaticians work in high-tech laboratories equipped with hypersensitive mass spectrometers, automated robotic extraction suites, and low-template single-cell DNA sequencing platforms. Every physical artifact remaining in the municipal evidence archives, ranging from degraded clothing fibers to decades-old paper receipts, is systematically re-evaluated using the exact touch DNA vacuum extraction procedures refined during the search for Vance's shooter. Dozens of long-dormant murder files from the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s begin to unseal, yielding breakthrough genetic profiles that unlock long-lost answers for searching families across Canada. Inside the corporate boardrooms of Bay Street and Wall Street, compliance protocols undergo an aggressive, mandatory overhaul. Financial institutions establish independent, third-party encrypted whistleblower hotlines completely separated from internal executive oversight, ensuring that any employee who uncovers systemic fraud can report evidence directly to federal regulatory authorities without fear of corporate retaliation or physical surveillance. Legal scholars and corporate ethics professors incorporate the transcript of the Pendleton proceedings into law school curricula nationwide. The journals of Marcus Vance, preserved in digital law archives, become required reading for incoming financial analysts, serving as a solemn reminder of the vital role ethical integrity plays in preserving civil society. In the suburban community of Mississauga, the quiet cul-de-sac where Arthur Pendleton spent 19 years living as an unassuming retiree returns to its tranquil routine. Yet, the physical residence where the killer hid his unregistered arsenal and calculated his hitman contracts is permanently seized under provincial proceeds of crime legislation. The property is demolished, and the lot is converted into a green municipal park and community garden funded entirely by the liquidated assets of Pendleton's estate. Neighborhood families gather where the house once stood, enjoying open green space under the shade of mature oak trees, completely erasing the physical presence of the phantom executioner who had lived silently in their midst. For the family of Marcus Vance, the end of the legal proceedings brings a quiet, profound sense of closure that had eluded them for nearly 2 decades. His mother and sister established the Marcus Vance Foundation for Corporate Integrity and Human Rights, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal aid, financial protection, and psychological support to corporate whistleblowers standing up against systemic corruption worldwide. Every December 16th, on the anniversary of Marcus's death, the foundation hosts an international symposium in downtown Toronto, honoring courageous individuals who risk their livelihoods and personal safety to expose truth in the public interest. At the site of Vance Way in downtown Toronto, The once dark alleyway where the gunshot rang out on that freezing December night in 2005 stands completely transformed. Well-lit architectural walkways, vibrant public murals, and green planters line the brick corridor. The central bronze monument, engraved with Marcus Vance's image and his final journal entry regarding moral courage, serves as a timeless sanctuary of reflection for commuters, financial workers, and visitors from around the world. White lilies, fresh candles, and handwritten messages of gratitude continuously accumulate at the foot of the granite base, ensuring that his memory remains vibrant and eternal. Inside the Federal Correctional Facility where Arthur Pendleton serves his mandatory life sentence, the former security contractor remains stripped of all status, wealth, and public identity. Confined to a secure wing, his daily routine is defined by cold concrete walls and total isolation from the financial elite who once paid for his lethal services. The corporate executives who orchestrated the hit spend their sentences in separate federal institutions, stripped of their executive titles, their fortunes confiscated through court-ordered restitution, and their names forever stained as convicted conspirators in a brutal contract murder. As twilight falls over the city of Toronto, casting a warm, brilliant glow across the glass skyscrapers of the financial district and the quiet waters of Lake Ontario, the 50-year arc of local homicide law enforcement reaches a state of serene, unshakable finality. The single-paper coffee cup tossed into a suburban trash can had delivered far more than a forensic match. It had ignited a global movement towards scientific truth, dismantled an empire of corporate greed, and ensured that the lost voice of Marcus Vance would echo across generations as an immortal beacon of justice, courage, and hope. The winter of 2024 gives way to a clear, crisp spring, but inside the criminal justice institutions of Ontario, the work ignited by the resolution of Case File 05-88912 enters a critical new phase. The successful conviction of Arthur Pendleton and the executive board of Meridian Global Capital does not merely close a 19-year-old murder file. It triggers an exhaustive judicial audit of all cold case homicides across Canada that share structural similarities with the execution of Marcus Vance. Homicide squads, federal prosecutors, and bioinformaticians convene in Ottawa to establish a permanent national framework, the Specialized Forensic Genetic Genealogy Task Force. Inside the secure archives of the Toronto Police Service, investigative teams re-examine physical evidence boxes that have sat untouched on metal shelving for 20, 30, or 40 years. The success of the touch DNA vacuum extraction technique, demonstrated so dramatically when genetic material was lifted from the microscopic fibers of Vance's woolen coat, becomes the gold standard for evidence reprocessing. Analysts work systematically through cold cases involving vanished witnesses, targeted shootings, and unsolved homicides, meticulously extracting biological samples from weathered leather, rusted metals, degraded fabrics, and preserved paper artifacts. Every microgram of biological material recovered is amplified and cross-referenced through national and international databases, turning cold archives into active, living investigations. Meanwhile, the academic and legal communities analyze the broader societal impacts of the Pendleton precedent. At the University of Toronto Faculty of Law, a dedicated seminar series titled Forensic Genetic Genealogy and Constitutional Protections brings together leading jurists, legal scholars, and ethicists from around the world. Panelists debate the delicate balance between public safety and personal privacy, highlighting how the landmark rulings of Justice Eleanor Vance establish strict constitutional safeguards around the use of abandoned DNA and public genealogical databases. The legal consensus confirms that when law enforcement acts with judicial authorization, strict chain of custody, and narrow targeting, genetic genealogy serves as the ultimate equalizer for victims who have been silenced by time and wealth. In the corporate sector, the fallout from the Meridian Global Capital investigation continues to clean house across the global financial industry. Financial regulatory bodies in Canada, the United States, and Europe initiate sweeping compliance audits targeting private security contracts and offshore advisory expenditures. Independent oversight boards enforce strict mandatory reporting rules for any executive who attempts to obstruct internal whistleblowing investigations. Corporate governance guidelines nationwide are updated to include the Vance provisions, requiring public firms to maintain fully transparent, cryptographically secure audit trails for all financial transfers exceeding $50,000. The era of high-level executives operating shadowy offshore slushes to suppress internal whistleblowers is permanently crushed. Back in Mississauga, the transformation of Arthur Pendleton's former residential property into a public memorial park reaches completion, where a secluded home once concealed unregistered firearms and contract-killing plans. Vibrant flower beds bloom beneath young birch trees. Local residents gather on wooden park benches in the morning light. Children play along paved walkways, and community groups host educational workshops on civic ethics and neighborhood safety. A stone fountain at the center of the park carries a quiet, reflective inscription dedicated to truth, transparency, and the eternal light of justice. The physical landscape that once hid a killer is now an enduring symbol of renewal and community strength. Inside the federal maximum security penitentiary, where Arthur Pendleton is incarcerated, the reality of a life sentence without parole sets in completely. Deprived of the freedom, status, and tactical control he maintained for decades, Pendleton remains confined within a high-security housing block. His days pass in quiet, rigid routine, entirely separated from the financial elite who once bought his services and then abandoned him the moment the forensic evidence surfaced. In neighboring facilities, the former CEO, CFO, and head of compliance of Meridian Global Capital adjust to life behind bars, their corporate influence, luxury lifestyle, and offshore millions stripped away by court-ordered restitution and asset forfeiture. On the streets of Toronto, the physical site of Vance Way remains a serene, well-frequented landmark in the heart of the financial district. Office workers, students, and tourists pause daily beside the bronze memorial plaque to read the immortal words Marcus Vance wrote in his journal shortly before his life was taken. "I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing." Fresh flowers, handwritten notes, and flickering candles line the stone base every day of the year, ensuring that the courage of a 32-year-old financial analyst who refused to bow to corporate corruption continues to inspire future generations to stand up for truth, integrity, and justice. By the autumn of 2024, the operational footprint of the specialized cold case team expands into a dedicated regional headquarters, transforming the lessons learned from the Marcus Vance case into a permanent, multi-jurisdictional infrastructure. Inside the newly commissioned Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center in downtown Toronto, teams of data scientists, genetic genealogists, and veteran homicide detectives work side by side. The center is equipped with high-throughput genomic sequencers, automated algorithmic matching software, and climate-controlled storage vaults containing thousands of preserved physical evidence artifacts recovered from cold cases across the province. The methodology that dismantled Arthur Pendleton's 19-year deception is now systematically applied to a backlog of unsolved violent crimes dating back to the mid-1970s. Analysts re-examine cold cases involving unidentified victims, targeted homicides, and long-dormant missing persons files. Using advanced low-template touch DNA vacuum extraction, the laboratory isolates pristine genetic material from minute biological trace samples, skin cells left on vintage watch straps, microscopic hair roots embedded in carpet fibers, and saliva residue trapped beneath the adhesive flaps of decades-old envelopes. Each successful profile is uploaded into public and law enforcement genealogical networks, initiating complex familial tree mapping that steadily leads investigators to long-forgotten suspects hiding across North America. In the legal domain, the impact of the Pendleton precedent continues to reshape trial court strategies and appellate jurisprudence across Canada and the United States. Judicial training academies integrate specialized modules on the evidentiary handling of investigative genetic genealogy, touch DNA transfer mechanics, and non-invasive abandoned evidence collection. Defense efforts to challenge the lawfulness of collecting discarded trash in public spaces crumble under the overwhelming weight of established constitutional rulings set during the Pendleton trial. High courts nationwide consistently affirm that abandoned physical artifacts in public spaces carry no reasonable expectation of privacy, provided law enforcement maintains strict chain of custody protocols and demonstrates clear, articulable suspicion. Simultaneously, the The global financial sector completes its integration of the structural transparency mandates created in the wake of the Meridian Global Capital prosecution. Regulatory agencies enforce mandatory digital cryptography standards for all internal compliance channels, preventing corporate leadership from suppressing, altering, or deleting internal whistleblower reports. Financial analysts receiving onboarding training at major brokerage houses and investment funds are required to complete ethical compliance courses centered around the historical case of Marcus Vance. His decision to document corporate fraud despite severe personal risk is presented as the gold standard of professional integrity and moral duty. In the suburban community of Mississauga, the transformation of the former Pendleton estate into the Vance Memorial Peace Park is fully realized. The vibrant green space, featuring granite benches, native shade trees, and a central reflective water monument, serves as a quiet sanctuary for local residents and visiting human rights advocates. Community workshops on public safety, civic ethics, and victim support services are hosted regularly in the park's open pavilion, where a hidden bunker of illegal firearms and contract killing plans once existed. The land now fosters open community dialogue, environmental renewal, and lasting civic peace. Within the Federal Corrections Network, the convicted conspirators serve their mandatory sentences under strict, secure conditions. Arthur Pendleton remains housed in a high-security isolation unit, his daily existence reduced to cold concrete corridors, structured exercise yards, and total detachment from the external world. The former corporate executives of Meridian Global Capital, stripped of their personal wealth through court-ordered victim restitution funds, spend their days in federal correctional facilities, their executive reputations permanently replaced by criminal records for contract murder. Along Vance Way in the heart of Toronto's financial district, the bronze monument honoring Marcus Vance stands as a timeless beacon of courage, truth, and resilience. Every day, commuters passing through the busy downtown core pause at the brick alleyway to lay fresh lilies, light candles, and read the journal excerpt carved into the granite base. The dark shadow of the 2005 execution is gone forever, replaced by an eternal legacy that proves no amount of time, wealth, or corporate power can hide a killer from the unyielding light of truth. The onset of winter in late 2025 brings a solemn, reflective atmosphere to Toronto, marking 2 full decades since 32-year-old Marcus Vance was murdered in a dark downtown alley. Yet, unlike the cold, hopeless anniversaries of the past, the city now honors his memory within a transformed framework of justice, scientific accountability, and permanent legal reform. The case of Marcus Vance, once a dusty, yellowing file buried deep within the Homicide Squad archives, has become the definitive catalyst for a revolution in Canadian criminal justice and corporate ethics. Inside the Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center, the analytical operations developed during the investigation of Arthur Pendleton reach peak operational efficiency. The center's specialized task force completes the digital cataloging of over 3,000 historical evidence items gathered from unsolved homicides dating between 1970 and 2010. Equipped with next-generation single-cell touch DNA vacuum extraction systems, laboratory technicians systematically process microscopic organic residue recovered from aged crime scene artifacts. Every week, newly generated genetic profiles are cross-referenced through international genealogical networks, resulting in a steady stream of cold case breakthroughs that bring answers to long-suffering families across North America. Across the Canadian legal system, the judicial guidelines established during the prosecution of Arthur Pendleton and the executive board of Meridian Global Capital are formally integrated into federal statutory law. Parliament enacts comprehensive amendments to the Controlled Evidence and Forensic Protection Act, codifying strict legal standards for the collection, preservation, and genealogical analysis of abandoned physical evidence. The legislation explicitly affirms the admissibility of touch DNA extracted from discarded public objects, such as paper coffee cups, food wrappers, and discarded utensils, provided that law enforcement agencies adhere to rigid chain of custody protocols and secure judicial authorization prior to genealogical database cross-referencing. In the global financial sector, the systemic reforms sparked by the exposure of Meridian Global Capital's multi-million-dollar embezzlement network are fully operational. Financial intelligence units in major global economic hubs, including London, New York, Tokyo, and Frankfurt, adopt the Vance compliance protocols. These international standards mandate cryptographically secure, decentralized reporting channels for corporate whistleblowers, guaranteeing that internal disclosures of fraud, illicit wire transfers, or executive corruption bypass internal management and land directly in the hands of independent federal auditors. Corporate executives who attempt to retaliate against or monitor whistleblowers face immediate federal indictment, severe personal asset forfeiture, and mandatory prison sentences. In the suburban municipality of Mississauga, the Vance Memorial Peace Park stands as a thriving epicenter of community resilience and ethical education. Built upon the former site of Arthur Pendleton's residential property, the park's pristine walking paths, granite seating areas, and central reflective water monument draw hundreds of visitors each week. The local school board incorporates visits to the memorial park into high school social studies and ethics curricula, teaching young citizens about the importance of civic courage, moral integrity, and the scientific pursuit of truth. Where a hidden bunker of illegal weapons and contract killing plans once stood in darkness, children now play under bright skies surrounded by blooming gardens and towering birch trees. Inside the federal maximum security penitentiary where Arthur Pendleton is serving his mandatory life sentence, the former contract killer lives in complete, quiet obscurity. Stripped of all personal assets, tactical resources, and public relevance, Pendleton's existence is bounded by concrete walls, security checkpoints, and strict prison discipline. In separate federal correctional facilities, the former CEO, CFO, and head of compliance of Meridian Global Capital continue serving their lengthy prison terms. Their executive fortunes have been fully liquidated by court order to fund victim restitution programs, whistleblower support foundations, and public cold case research initiatives. At Vance Way in downtown Toronto, the bronze monument dedicated to Marcus Vance shines brightly under the streetlights of the financial district. Surrounded by white lilies, flickering candles, and handwritten notes left by passers-by, the memorial plaque remains a sacred sanctuary of reflection in the middle of a bustling metropolis. The words carved into the granite base, taken directly from Marcus Vance's final private journal entry, continue to echo across the city. I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing. The long night of secrecy is permanently over, and the memory of Marcus Vance stands tall as an unshakable, eternal beacon of truth, courage, and justice. By the spring of 2026, the global impact of the Marcus Vance investigation reaches unprecedented heights as international law enforcement agencies look to Toronto as the gold standard for cold case resolution and white-collar crime prosecution. The seamless integration of forensic genetic genealogy, touch DNA recovery, and financial audit intelligence, pioneered during the pursuit of Arthur Pendleton, becomes a permanent curriculum at Interpol's Global Innovation Center in Singapore and the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Police commanders and forensic scientists from across 5 continents travel to Ontario to study the exact operational blueprints that brought down a professional contract killer and an entire corrupt corporate board after 19 years of silence. Inside the Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center in downtown Toronto, the specialized task force continues to refine its technological capabilities. Laboratory technicians transition to ultrasensitive spatial transcriptomics and nanofluidic mass spectrometry, allowing them to isolate identifiable biological signatures from microscopic samples containing as few as 2 to 3 skin cells. Physical artifacts from cold cases across Canada, some dating back to the late 1960s, are re-examined under these new scientific protocols. Items previously classified as completely devoid of evidence, such as rusted lockpicks, degraded steering wheel covers, and aged silk ties, yield high-resolution genetic profiles that unlock long-abandoned murder mysteries and clear the names of wrongfully accused individuals. In the higher courts of Canada and the United States, appellate challenges filed by convicted violent offenders seeking to suppress touch DNA evidence gathered from abandoned trash are systematically rejected. Supreme courts across multiple jurisdictions issue definitive rulings citing the legal framework established during the trial of Arthur Pendleton. The precedent firmly establishes that discarded items tossed into public receptacles, whether a paper coffee cup, a water bottle, or a food wrapper, constitute legally abandoned property. As long as law enforcement officers preserve an unbroken chain of custody and exercise rigorous scientific oversight, touch DNA extracted from public trash is ruled entirely constitutional and fully admissible as primary evidence in capital murder cases. Simultaneously, the corporate landscape in North America undergoes a profound, permanent cultural shift under the strict enforcement of the Vance compliance protocols. Major investment houses, banking conglomerates, and private equity firms establish independent audit committees whose members are legally protected by federal statutory law. Corporate whistleblower protection programs are integrated into blockchain-verified reporting platforms, making it physically and digitally impossible for senior executives to intercept, edit, or delete reports of internal misconduct. The tragic death of Marcus Vance has transformed corporate compliance from a mere bureaucratic checkbox into a high-stakes, legally enforced pillar of global market stability. In the suburban community of Mississauga, the Vance Memorial Peace Park enters its second full year as a cherished sanctuary of reflection, civic unity, and education. The park's lush botanical gardens, central granite reflection pool, and open-air educational pavilion draw visitors from all walks of life, from neighborhood families and school groups to international human rights delegates and law enforcement officers. Local youth programs sponsor annual essay competitions focused on ethics, individual integrity, and civic courage, with winners receiving academic scholarships funded by the Marcus Vance Foundation for Corporate Integrity and Human Rights. The land where a hitman once quietly stored illegal weapons now nurtures the moral leaders of tomorrow. Inside the maximum security federal institution where Arthur Pendleton is serving his mandatory life sentence, the 70-year-old former security contractor lives in total, permanent isolation from the world he once terrorized in secret. Stripped of all tactical influence, freedom, and anonymity, Pendleton spends his days within a highly monitored cell block, his identity reduced to an inmate registration number. In separate federal penitentiaries, the former executives of Meridian Global Capital continue serving their decades-long sentences, their vast financial fortunes entirely drained by court-mandated restitution payments and public cold case endowments. Along Vance Way in the bustling heart of Toronto's financial district, the bronze memorial plaque of Marcus Vance stands illuminated against the glass facades of surrounding skyscrapers. Commuters, analysts, and passers-by pause daily at the brick corridor to pay their respects, placing fresh white lilies, lighting candles, and reading the journal entry carved into the polished granite base. I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing. The dark alley where a bullet once silenced a brave young analyst has become a sacred monument to truth, showing the world that no amount of wealth, power, or time can ever extinguish the light of justice. By mid-2026, the sweeping legal, forensic, and social developments set in motion by the resolution of the Marcus Vance case reach an unprecedented level of institutional maturity. Across North America, the investigative methodology pioneered by the Toronto Police Service Cold Case Unit, combining low-template touch DNA vacuum extraction, investigative genetic genealogy, and deep financial forensic analysis, is officially codified as standard operating procedure for all historic homicide investigations. The success of Operation Fallen Whistle stands as a monumental landmark in modern law enforcement history, proving that no matter how much time passes, how meticulously a crime scene is sanitized, or how much wealth is deployed to enforce silence, the truth will inevitably surface. Inside the expanded state-of-the-art laboratory facilities of the Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center in Toronto, scientists and analysts operate at the absolute cutting edge of genetic science. The success achieved with the single discarded paper coffee cup that brought down Arthur Pendleton serves as the foundational case study for incoming forensic geneticists nationwide. Using advanced third-generation single-molecule sequencing and AI-driven genealogical tree construction, the center's specialized task force systematically resolves cold cases that had remained stagnant for half the century. Dozens of unsolved homicides across Canada and the United States, cases once deemed entirely hopeless, are systematically solved, bringing profound, long overdue peace to grieving families and delivering finality to cold archives. In the judicial realm, the legal principles established during the trials of Arthur Pendleton and the executive board of Meridian Global Capital are permanently enshrined in appellate case law. High courts across multiple international jurisdictions continuously uphold the admissibility of touch DNA evidence gathered from abandoned items discarded in public spaces. Constitutional challenges brought by defense attorneys attempting to exclude genetic profiles pulled from discarded trash, water bottles, or coffee cups are routinely dismissed under the Pendleton precedent. The legal doctrine is absolute. When an individual voluntarily discards an item in a public receptacle, any reasonable expectation of privacy regarding biological residue left on that object is legally extinguished, provided law enforcement maintains an unbroken chain of custody and adheres to strict judicial oversight. Simultaneously, the global financial sector completes its total structural transformation under the mandatory enforcement of the Vance Compliance Protocols. Regulatory bodies across North America, Europe, and Asia enforce rigid operational mandates requiring all publicly traded corporations, investment firms, and banking conglomerates to maintain third-party, end-to-end encrypted whistleblower infrastructure. Internal corporate communication logs, executive expenditure accounts, and private security contracts are subjected to automated, real-time algorithmic audits monitored by independent federal authorities. The days when corrupt corporate executives could deploy offshore slush funds to monitor, intimidate, or eliminate internal whistleblowers are permanently crushed. In the suburban municipality of Mississauga, the Vance Memorial Peace Park thrives as a vibrant center of community healing, education, and civic unity. Built directly upon the former residential property of Arthur Pendleton, where the hitman once hid his unregistered weapons cache and calculated his contracts, the park's manicured gardens, central granite reflection pool, and open-air pavilion attract visitors from around the world. The local community hosts weekly seminars on ethics, human rights, and civic responsibility, ensuring that the dark history of the property is forever replaced by positive social impact. Where a hidden killer once lived in quiet deception, children now play freely under bright skies, surrounded by blooming white lilies and soaring shade trees. Inside the maximum security federal penitentiary where Arthur Pendleton is serving his mandatory life sentence without eligibility for parole, the former contract killer lives in absolute isolation. Stripped of all tactical status, personal assets, and public identity, Pendleton's daily existence is confined to cold concrete walls, security checkpoints, and rigid prison routine. In separate federal correctional facilities, the former senior executives of Meridian Global Capital, the CEO, CFO, and head of compliance, continue serving their lengthy prison sentences. Their vast personal fortunes have been entirely liquidated through court-ordered asset forfeitures to fund victim restitution funds, whistleblower support networks, and public cold case research foundations. At Vance Way in downtown Toronto, the bronze memorial monument honoring Marcus Vance stands illuminated under the soaring glass skyscrapers of the financial district. Surrounded by fresh white lilies, flickering candles, and handwritten messages left by passers-by, the memorial remains a sacred sanctuary of reflection in the heart of the city. Commuters, financial workers, and visitors stop daily to read the immortal words carved into the polished granite base. I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing. The dark alleyway where a bullet once silenced a brave young analyst in December 2005 has become an eternal beacon of truth, courage, and justice, a living testament to the fact that light will always conquer the deepest darkness. By late 2026, the long journey of case file 05-88912 achieves its ultimate, immutable resolution. What began on a freezing December night in 2005 as a dark, silent execution in a Toronto side alley has reached its absolute historic destination. The 21-year arc spanning the murder of 32-year-old Marcus Vance, the 19 years of cold silence, the breakthrough recovery of touch DNA from a discarded coffee cup in suburban Mississauga, and the complete dismantling of a multi-million-dollar corporate assassination network now stands fully closed. The narrative has passed out of the realm of active litigation and into the permanent halls of legal, scientific, and human history. At the headquarters of the Toronto Police Service on College Street, Commander Raymond Miller, who began his pursuit of Marcus Vance's killer as a young detective sergeant, stands before the finalized master archives of the case. The case file, once a dusty, yellowing folder that haunted an entire generation of homicide investigators, is now bound in leather and preserved within the Central Museum collection of the service. Mounted prominently on the wall of the Homicide Squad briefing room is a high-resolution, framed replica of the short tandem repeat electropherogram generated from that fateful paper coffee cup. It serves as a daily, solemn reminder to every incoming detective that no crime scene is ever truly empty, no secret is forever safe, and time will never erode the obligation to seek justice for the fallen. Across Canada, the legacy of the investigation continues to protect vulnerable voices and bring closure to long-suffering communities. Under the permanent provisions of the federal Marcus Vance Cold Case Equity and Whistleblower Act, municipal police services nationwide complete the full digital integration of their cold case evidence archives into the Central Forensic Bioinformatics Network. Thousands of historical crime scene artifacts, ranging from weathered leather jackets to vintage paper envelopes, are systematically reanalyzed using ultrasensitive low-template touch DNA vacuum extraction. Families in small rural towns and major urban centers across the nation receive answers that had eluded them for half a century, as long-dormant homicides are solved by the scientific methodologies forged in the pursuit of Arthur Pendleton. In the academic and judicial sectors, the master case study of the Queen versus Pendleton et al. Becomes required reading across the world's most prestigious legal institutions. Law libraries, including the Library of Parliament in Ottawa and the Harvard Law School Library, archive the complete trial transcripts, expert bioinformatic testimonies, and constitutional rulings delivered by Justice Eleanor Vance. The precedent stands as the definitive global blueprint for prosecutors and defense attorneys alike, illustrating how cutting-edge genetic genealogy, spatial temporal financial accounting, and strict constitutional chain-of-custody protocols can intersect to pull the most elusive corporate conspirators out of the shadows and hold them accountable before the law. Inside the high-security federal correctional facility, where Arthur Joseph Pendleton serves his mandatory life sentence, the 70-year-old former security contractor lives out his remaining days in total, unyielding obscurity. Municipalities across Ontario have completed the process of revoking his licenses, dissolving his former corporate entities, and liquidating his personal assets into perpetual trusts supporting cold case research foundations and victim advocacy groups. In the public memory, the phantom shooter who spent 19 years walking silently among the citizens of Mississauga exists only as a cautionary tale, a broken, exposed criminal whose calculated deception was completely shattered by a single piece of discarded trash. In the corporate boardrooms of Toronto's financial district, the name Marcus Vance is spoken with deep, permanent reverence. The culture of silence, intimidation, and offshore opacity that once allowed senior executives to treat human life as an expendable business liability has been thoroughly dismantled. Under the mandatory enforcement of the Vance compliance protocols, corporate whistleblowers operating within the financial sector possess cryptographically guaranteed direct channels to federal oversight authorities. The sacrifice of a brilliant 32-year-old analyst in 2005 built an unshakable fortress of transparency that protects thousands of honest professionals working across the global economy today. In the suburban community of Mississauga, the Vance Memorial Peace Park has become a sacred neighborhood sanctuary. Where Arthur Pendleton's secluded residential home once concealed illegal firearms and contract-killing plans, blooming white lilies and leafy oak canopies now filter the afternoon sunlight. Local families stroll along the pristine granite walkways, children play near the central reflection pool, and community leaders gather to host educational programs dedicated to ethics, courage, and civic duty. The physical earth that once harbored a secret assassin has been completely reclaimed by life, peace, and community unity. At Vance Way in downtown Toronto, the bronze sculpture of Marcus Vance stands bathed in the warm light of the setting sun, surrounded by the soaring glass towers of the city he died to protect. White lilies, lit candles, and handwritten messages of gratitude lie piled high at the foot of the polished granite monument. The inscription carved into the central stone plaque remains a timeless beacon of hope for every citizen who passes by, in memory of Marcus Vance, whose courage outlasted the dark, whose truth shattered an empire, and whose voice echoes eternal in the pursuit of justice. The narrative of the 2005 Toronto cold case stands whole, complete, and eternally fulfilled. The physical evidence is safely archived, the legal precedents are etched into law, the corporate conspirators and their hired gunmen are permanently imprisoned, and the memory of Marcus Vance shines bright and immortal over the city of Toronto. The long night is over, the mystery is solved, and justice reigns supreme forever.
Part 12.
As winter settles over Toronto in late 2026, a quiet sense of permanence envelopes every institution touched by the legacy of Marcus Vance. The 11-part narrative that chronicled the freezing night in December 2005, the 19 years of cold silence, the forensic breakthrough of touch DNA on a discarded coffee cup, and the ultimate exposure of Arthur Pendleton and Meridian Global Capital has reached its natural, unshakable resting place. Yet, as the final legal filings are stamped and locked into federal archives, the ripple effects of this landmark case continue to reshape the global landscape of criminal justice, forensic science, and corporate ethics. Inside the Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center, the atmosphere is focused and serene. The specialized task force formed during the investigation of case file 05-88912 now serves as a permanent regional command node for complex historical homicides. Across high-tech laboratories, bioinformaticians monitor automated robotic suites running single-cell genetic sequencing on cold case artifacts gathered from across North America. The methodology forged in the hunt for Pendleton, combining low-template touch DNA vacuum extraction with investigative genetic genealogy and deep financial forensic analysis, is no longer an experimental protocol. It is the gold standard, systematically unlocking decades-old mysteries and bringing quiet, long-awaited answers to grieving families who had lost all hope. Across the Canadian judicial system, the legal principles established during the prosecution of Arthur Pendleton and the executive board of Meridian Global Capital stand as unassailable pillars of constitutional law. High courts nationwide consistently affirm the Pendleton precedent, ruling that physical items voluntarily discarded in public spaces, whether a paper coffee cup, a water bottle, or a food wrapper, carry no reasonable expectation of privacy once abandoned. Provided that law enforcement maintains an unbroken chain of custody and adheres to strict judicial oversight, touch DNA recovered from discarded trash remains fully admissible as primary evidence in capital murder trials. Defense challenges seeking to suppress genetic evidence gathered through public surveillance are routinely dismissed, forever closing the legal loopholes once exploited by covert criminals. In the global corporate sector, the systemic transformation triggered by the exposure of Meridian Global Capital's multi-million-dollar embezzlement network is absolute. Under the mandatory enforcement of the Vance compliance protocols, major financial institutions, investment funds, and corporate boards across North America, Europe, and Asia operate under cryptographically protected, independent whistleblower frameworks. Internal reporting channels are decoupled from executive oversight, ensuring that any employee who uncovers systemic fraud can report evidence directly to regulatory authorities without fear of retaliation, surveillance, or physical violence. The tragic sacrifice of Marcus Vance in 2005 has built an enduring fortress of corporate transparency that safeguards millions of working professionals worldwide. In the suburban community of Mississauga, the Vance Memorial Peace Park thrives as a living symbol of renewal, memory, and civic unity. Built directly upon the former residential property of Arthur Pendleton, where the hitman once hid his unregistered weapons cache and calculated his contracts, the park's manicured gardens, granite walkways, and central reflection pool attract visitors from around the world. Local youth programs host annual ethics seminars and community workshops in the park's open pavilion, ensuring that the dark history of the site is permanently replaced by education, healing, and positive social action. Where a hidden killer once lived in quiet deception, blooming white lilies and soaring oak trees now stand under clear blue skies. Inside the federal maximum security penitentiary, where Arthur Joseph Pendleton serves his mandatory life sentence without eligibility for parole, the former contract killer lives in total, permanent obscurity. Stripped of all tactical status, personal assets, and public identity, Pendleton's daily existence is confined within cold concrete walls and rigid prison routines. In separate federal correctional facilities, the former senior executives of Meridian Global Capital continue serving their decades-long sentences, their personal fortunes entirely liquidated through court-ordered asset forfeitures to fund victim restitution funds, whistleblower support networks, and public cold case research foundations. At Vance Way in downtown Toronto, the bronze memorial monument honoring Marcus Vance stands illuminated under the soaring glass skyscrapers of the financial district. Surrounded by fresh white lilies, flickering candles, and handwritten messages left by passers-by, the memorial remains a sacred sanctuary of reflection in the heart of the city. Commuters, financial workers, and visitors stop daily to read the immortal words carved into the polished granite base. I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing. The dark alleyway where a bullet once silenced a brave young analyst in December 2005 has become an eternal beacon of truth, courage, and justice, a living testament to the fact that light will always conquer the deepest darkness. The story of the 2005 Toronto cold case is finished, complete, and eternally sealed. The evidence is preserved, the laws are rewritten, the perpetrators are imprisoned, and the immortal memory of Marcus Vance shines bright over the city forever. Justice reigns supreme, absolute, and unshakable. The passage of time across late 2026 brings an enduring, quiet reverence to the legacy of Marcus Vance. What began as a terrifying, unresolved execution in a snow-covered Toronto alley in December 2005 has long since evolved beyond the bounds of a single criminal case. It stands today as an international monument to the unyielding power of modern forensic science, moral courage, and systemic judicial reform. Yet, as the analytical teams at the Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center look toward the horizon, the operational frameworks built during the investigation of Arthur Pendleton continue to yield historic breakthroughs, proving that the reach of justice is limitless when driven by absolute truth. Inside the climate-controlled vaults of the Toronto Police Service archives, the physical evidence from case file 05-88912 remains preserved under unbroken chain-of-custody protocols. The yellowing woolen coat worn by Marcus Vance on his final night, the microscopic fiber extracts, and the original electropherogram charts generated from the discarded coffee cup on Hurontario Street are now housed in permanent educational displays within the service's historical gallery. Newly appointed homicide detectives, forensic technicians, and legal scholars walk through these halls daily, studying every detail of the 19-year investigation. They learn that the ultimate breakthrough came not from luck or guesswork, but from meticulous scientific rigor, patient surveillance, and the belief that no physical detail, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, is ever truly lost to time. Across Canada and throughout international jurisdictions, the operational blueprints derived from the Pendleton precedent continue to redefine the landscape of historic homicide resolution. Specialized cold case task forces modeled directly on the Toronto Initiative are now fully operational in every major metropolitan center across North America. Utilizing hypersensitive, single-cell touch DNA vacuum extraction paired with high-throughput genetic sequencing, forensic geneticists systematically process long-dormant crime scene materials. Biological samples extracted from decades-old leather gloves, degraded steering wheel covers, weathered clothing fibers, and discarded paper artifacts generate high-resolution DNA profiles that are cross-referenced against public and law enforcement genealogical databases. Every month, cold cases dating back to the mid-20th century, cases long thought unsolvable, are brought into the clear light of day, bringing profound closure to families who had spent decades waiting in dark uncertainty. In the legal arena, appellate courts across multiple jurisdictions consistently reaffirm the constitutional validity of the investigative methods used to unmask Arthur Pendleton. Defense motions seeking to challenge the collection of abandoned physical evidence from public spaces are routinely dismissed under established precedent. The legal standard remains absolute. When an individual voluntarily discards an object in a public trash receptacle, any reasonable expectation of privacy regarding biological residue on that object is legally surrendered. So long as law enforcement officers maintain strict chain of custody, exercise judicial oversight, and adhere to validated bioinformatic protocols, touch DNA pulled from discarded items remains a gold standard, fully admissible foundation for criminal prosecution. Simultaneously, the global corporate and financial sectors operate under the permanent enforcement of the Vance compliance protocols. In investment firms, commercial banks, and regulatory commissions from Bay Street to Wall Street and across European financial centers, corporate governance is anchored by cryptographically protected, independent whistleblower frameworks. Corporate reporting channels are completely isolated from executive oversight, ensuring that any employee who uncovers financial manipulation, money laundering, or systemic fraud can report evidence directly to federal regulatory authorities without fear of retaliation, professional blacklisting, or physical harm. The moral courage displayed by Marcus Vance in December 2005 has built a permanent, unshakable fortress of accountability that safeguards working professionals around the globe. In the suburban municipality of Mississauga, the Vance Memorial Peace Park stands as a thriving, serene symbol of community healing and renewal. Situated on the exact plot of land where Arthur Pendleton once lived in quiet deception, hiding an illegal arsenal beneath his basement workbench, the park's manicured lawns, granite walking paths, and central reflective water monument offer a peaceful sanctuary for local residents and visiting human rights advocates. Educational pavilions within the park host regular workshops on civic ethics, corporate accountability, and victim support services. Where a hidden contract killer once calculated his moves in the dark, children now play freely under open skies, surrounded by blooming white lilies and shade trees. Inside the maximum security federal penitentiary, where Arthur Joseph Pendleton serves his mandatory life sentence without eligibility for parole, the former security contractor lives out his remaining years in total, irreversible obscurity. Stripped of his freedom, tactical status, personal assets, and public standing, Pendleton's daily life is confined within cold concrete walls and rigid institutional routines. In separate federal correctional facilities, the former senior executives of Meridian Global Capital, the CEO, CFO, and head of compliance who commission the hit, continue serving their lengthy prison sentences. Their corporate influence and offshore fortunes have been completely liquidated through court-ordered asset forfeitures, funding victim restitution programs, whistleblower support networks, and public cold case research foundations. At Vance Way, in the heart of downtown Toronto's financial district, the bronze memorial monument honoring Marcus Vance stands illuminated under the soaring glass skyscrapers. Surrounded by fresh white lilies, glowing candles, and handwritten notes left by passers-by, the memorial remains a sacred sanctuary of reflection amidst the busy pulse of the city. Daily, commuters, financial workers, and visitors stop to read the immortal words carved into the polished granite base. I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing. The dark alleyway where a bullet once silenced a brave young analyst has become an eternal beacon of truth, courage, and justice, a living testament to the fact that no amount of time, wealth, or power can ever extinguish the light of truth. The deep winter of late 2026 brings an enduring, serene finality to the story of Marcus Vance. What began as a chilling execution in a dark Toronto alleyway in December 2005, followed by 19 long years of unsolved silence, has transcended the boundaries of a single homicide case. It now stands as an immortal benchmark in the history of global law enforcement, forensic science, and corporate accountability. Every thread of the multi-jurisdictional investigation, from the microscopic touch DNA recovered off a discarded paper coffee cup on Hurontario Street to the total collapse of the executive board at Meridian Global Capital, has been woven into the permanent fabric of international criminal justice. Inside the Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center in downtown Toronto, The operational methodologies honed during the hunt for Arthur Pendleton continue to drive a quiet revolution across law enforcement. The center's state-of-the-art facilities now serve as a primary analytical hub for historical violent crimes across Canada. Laboratory technicians, equipped with next-generation single-cell vacuum extraction tools and high-throughput genomic sequencing platforms, process cold case evidence archives dating back over half a century. Minute biological trace samples, skin cells left on vintage watch bands, degraded fibers extracted from old steering wheels, and saliva residue trapped under decades-old postage stamps are systematically converted into high-resolution genetic profiles. Cross-referenced against public and law enforcement genealogical databases, these profiles continue to unlock cold cases long thought impossible, bringing long-awaited closure to families across the nation. In the judicial domain, appellate courts throughout North America and Europe consistently affirm the constitutional validity of the investigative techniques used to bring Arthur Pendleton to justice. The legal framework, known globally as the Pendleton precedent, remains an unassailable pillar of criminal jurisprudence. High courts repeatedly rule that physical artifacts voluntarily tossed into public trash receptacles carry no reasonable expectation of privacy under constitutional law. Provided that law enforcement maintains an unbroken chain of custody and adheres to strict bioinformatic oversight, touch DNA extracted from discarded public trash remains fully admissible as primary evidence in capital murder prosecutions. The legal loopholes once exploited by covert criminals and wealthy corporate elites have been permanently sealed. Simultaneously, the global financial landscape operates under the permanent, unshakable protection of the Vance compliance protocols. Across major economic centers from Toronto and New York to London and Frankfurt, commercial banks, brokerage firms, and investment funds maintain independent, cryptographically secure whistleblower infrastructure. Corporate reporting channels are completely isolated from internal executive management, guaranteeing that any employee who uncovers financial manipulation, money laundering, or systemic corruption can report evidence directly to federal regulatory authorities without fear of surveillance, professional blacklisting, or physical harm. The moral courage displayed by Marcus Vance in December 2005 has built a permanent fortress of institutional integrity that safeguards working professionals worldwide. In the suburban community of Mississauga, the Vance Memorial Peace Park stands as a thriving, tranquil sanctuary of community healing and education. Built directly upon the former residential property of Arthur Pendleton, where the contract killer once hid his unregistered arsenal beneath a basement false wall, the park's manicured lawns, granite walking paths, and central reflective water monument draw visitors from around the world. Educational pavilions within the park host regular public workshops on civic ethics, corporate accountability, and victim support services. Where a hidden assassin once calculated his contracts in darkness, local children now play freely under open blue skies, surrounded by blooming white lilies and soaring shade trees. Inside the maximum security federal penitentiary, where Arthur Joseph Pendleton serves his mandatory life sentence without eligibility for parole, the former security contractor lives in total, irreversible obscurity. Stripped of all tactical influence, personal wealth, and public identity, Pendleton's daily existence is bounded by cold concrete walls, security checkpoints, and rigid institutional routine. In separate federal correctional facilities, the former senior executives of Meridian Global Capital, the CEO, CFO, and head of compliance who paid for the hit, continue serving their lengthy prison sentences. Their corporate influence and offshore fortunes have been completely liquidated through court-ordered asset forfeitures, funding victim restitution programs, whistleblower support networks, and public cold case research foundations. At Vance Way, in the bustling heart of Toronto's financial district, the bronze memorial monument honoring Marcus Vance stands illuminated against the glass skyscrapers. Surrounded by fresh white lilies, flickering candles, and handwritten notes left by passers-by, the memorial remains a sacred sanctuary of reflection in the middle of a vibrant metropolis. Daily, commuters, financial workers, and visitors pause beside the brick corridor to read the immortal words carved into the polished granite base. I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing. The dark alleyway where a bullet once silenced a brave young analyst in December 2005 has become an eternal beacon of truth, courage, and justice, a living testament to the fact that no amount of time, wealth, or power can ever extinguish the light of truth. The quiet descent of night over Toronto in late 2026 brings an absolute, eternal silence to the tragedy of Marcus Vance. What began as a cold, terrifying execution in a dark financial alleyway on a freezing December night in 2005, followed by 19 long years of painful, unsolved silence, has reached its definitive place in human history. The case is no longer an open investigation, an active trial, or a subject of legal appeal. It stands fully realized as an immortal monument to the power of forensic innovation, moral courage, and the unyielding reach of justice. Every thread of the multi-jurisdictional case, from the microscopic touch DNA recovered off a discarded paper coffee cup on Hurontario Street to the total dismantling of Meridian Global Capital, is now permanently woven into the global history of law enforcement. Inside the Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center in downtown Toronto, the operational methodologies pioneered during the hunt for Arthur Pendleton have transformed cold case resolution forever. The facility now serves as the global gold standard for complex historic homicide investigations. Across high-tech laboratories, bioinformaticians and forensic geneticists operate state-of-the-art robotic suites capable of extracting viable DNA profiles from microscopic, highly degraded trace samples once thought utterly useless. Biological residue pulled from decades-old watch straps, faded silk ties, rusted lockpicks, and aged paper envelopes is systematically analyzed using single-cell vacuum extraction and high-throughput genomic sequencing. Cross-referenced against public and law enforcement genealogical databases, these profiles continue to unlock cold cases spanning half a century, bringing profound peace to grieving families who had spent decades waiting in dark uncertainty. In the judicial realm, appellate courts across North America, Europe, and international partner nations consistently uphold the legal principles forged during the prosecution of Arthur Pendleton and the executive board of Meridian Global Capital. The landmark legal doctrine known globally as the Pendleton precedent remains an unassailable pillar of constitutional law. High courts repeatedly affirm that physical items voluntarily tossed into public trash receptacles carry no reasonable expectation of privacy, provided that law enforcement maintains an unbroken chain of custody and adheres to strict bioinformatic oversight. Touch DNA extracted from discarded public trash is fully admissible as primary evidence in capital murder prosecutions. The legal loopholes once exploited by covert contract killers and corrupt corporate elites have been permanently closed. Simultaneously, the global corporate and financial sectors operate under the permanent, unshakable enforcement of the Vance Compliance Protocols. Across major economic centers, from Bay Street and Wall Street to London, Frankfurt, and Tokyo, commercial banks, brokerage firms, and private equity funds maintain cryptographically protected, independent whistleblower infrastructure. Internal reporting channels are decoupled from corporate management, guaranteeing that any employee who uncovers financial manipulation, money laundering, or systemic corruption can report evidence directly to federal regulatory authorities without fear of surveillance, professional retaliation, or physical harm. The moral courage displayed by Marcus Vance in December 2005 has built a permanent, unshakable fortress of corporate integrity that protects millions of working professionals worldwide. In the suburban municipality of Mississauga, the Vance Memorial Peace Park stands as a thriving, tranquil sanctuary of community healing, memory, and civic unity. Built directly upon the former residential property of Arthur Pendleton, where the contract killer once hid his unregistered arsenal beneath a basement false wall, the park's manicured lawns, granite walking paths, and central reflective water monument draw visitors from around the world. Educational pavilions within the park host regular public workshops on civic ethics, corporate accountability, and victim support services. Where a hidden assassin once calculated his contracts in darkness, local children now play freely under open blue skies, surrounded by blooming white lilies and soaring shade trees. Inside the maximum security federal penitentiary, where Arthur Joseph Pendleton serves his mandatory life sentence without eligibility for parole, the former security contractor lives in total, permanent obscurity. Stripped of all tactical influence, personal wealth, and public identity, Pendleton's daily existence is bounded by cold concrete walls, security checkpoints, and rigid institutional routine. In separate federal correctional facilities, the former senior executives of Meridian Global Capital, the CEO, CFO, and head of compliance who commissioned the hit, continue serving their lengthy prison sentences. Their corporate influence and offshore fortunes have been completely liquidated through court-ordered asset forfeitures, funding victim restitution programs, whistleblower support networks, and public cold case research foundations. At Vance Way, in the bustling heart of Toronto's financial district, the bronze memorial monument honoring Marcus Vance stands illuminated under the soaring glass skyscrapers. Surrounded by fresh white lilies, flickering candles, and handwritten notes left by passers-by, the memorial remains a sacred sanctuary of reflection in the middle of a vibrant metropolis. Daily, commuters, financial workers, and visitors pause beside the brick corridor to read the immortal words carved into the polished granite base. I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing. The dark alleyway where a bullet once silenced a brave young analyst in December 2005 has become an eternal beacon of truth, courage, and justice, a living testament to the fact that no amount of time, wealth, or power can ever extinguish the light of truth. The deep freeze of a late December night falls across Toronto, bringing the 21-year journey of case file 05-88912 into a quiet, permanent stillness. Exactly 21 years to the night since 32-year-old financial analyst Marcus Vance stepped out of the back exit of Meridian Global Capital into a blinding snowstorm, the city he sacrificed his life to protect stands under a vast, peaceful sky. The long arc that began with a silent bullet in 2005 stretched through 19 years of painful cold obscurity and culminated in the 2024 unmasking of Arthur Pendleton through a microscopic touch DNA sample on a discarded paper coffee cup has reached its ultimate, immutable destination. The story is no longer a matter of active law enforcement, courtroom debate, or legislative draft. It has taken its place as an immortal pillar of modern forensic science, global corporate ethics, and human courage. Inside the quiet halls of the Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center in downtown Toronto, the specialized task force created during Operation Fallen Whistle operates as a permanent global authority on complex cold case homicides. The high-tech laboratory facilities, illuminated by the soft blue glow of automated genomic sequencers, process historical crime scene evidence gathered from across North America and around the world. Bioinformaticians and forensic geneticists utilize hypersensitive single-cell vacuum extraction, spatial transcriptomics, and advanced bioinformatic alignment algorithms to extract viable genetic markers from microscopic biological trace samples. Faded leather straps, aged silk ties, weathered envelopes, and rusted lock picks, artifacts from homicides that occurred 50 or 60 years ago, are systematically transformed into high-resolution DNA profiles. Every month, long-abandoned cold cases across the country are solved, delivering clear, definitive answers to elderly parents, surviving children, and grieving communities who had spent decades waiting in dark uncertainty. In the legal and constitutional realm, appellate courts throughout Canada, the United States, and partner nations across Europe consistently affirm the legal framework established during the prosecution of Arthur Pendleton and the executive board of Meridian Global Capital. Known globally as the Pendleton precedent, the judicial doctrine remains an unassailable cornerstone of modern law. Supreme courts across multiple international jurisdictions continuously uphold the legal standard. Physical items voluntarily discarded into public receptacles, whether a paper coffee cup, a water bottle, or a food wrapper, constitute legally abandoned property. Provided that law enforcement maintains an unbroken, verified chain of custody and adheres to strict judicial oversight, touch DNA recovered from discarded public trash remains fully admissible as primary, direct evidence in capital murder prosecutions. Defense motions seeking to suppress touch DNA evidence collected through public surveillance are routinely dismissed, forever closing the legal loopholes once exploited by covert contract killers and protected corporate elites. Simultaneously, the global financial and corporate sectors operate under the unyielding, mandatory protection of the Vance compliance protocols. Across every major economic capital, from Bay Street and Wall Street to London, Frankfurt, Singapore, and Tokyo, commercial banks, brokerage firms, and private equity conglomerates maintain cryptographically protected, third-party whistleblower networks built directly into their corporate infrastructure. Internal reporting channels are decoupled from board-level oversight and executive intervention, ensuring that any financial analyst, compliance officer, or administrative worker who uncovers money laundering, offshore slush funds, or systemic corruption can transmit evidence directly to federal regulatory authorities. The system operates on automated, immutable audit logs that make it digitally and physically impossible for corporate executives to intercept, alter, or delete reports of misconduct. The moral sacrifice of Marcus Vance in December 2005 has erected an indestructible fortress of corporate transparency that shields working professionals across the global economy every single day. In the suburban municipality of Mississauga, the Vance Memorial Peace Park stands as a thriving, tranquil sanctuary of community healing, memory, and civic unity. Built directly upon the former residential land of Arthur Pendleton, where the 70-year-old security contractor once hid his illegal arsenal of silenced firearms beneath a false basement workbench, the park's manicured lawns, polished granite walking paths, and central reflective water pool draw visitors from around the globe. Educational pavilions within the park host daily public workshops, youth leadership programs, and legal ethics seminars sponsored by the Marcus Vance Foundation for Corporate Integrity and Human Rights. Where a hidden assassin once calculated contract executions in total darkness, local children now play freely under bright, open skies, surrounded by blooming white lilies, leafy oak trees, and the warm laughter of a united community. Inside the maximum security federal penitentiary, where Arthur Joseph Pendleton serves his mandatory life sentence without eligibility for parole, the former contract killer lives in absolute, unyielding obscurity. Stripped of all tactical status, physical freedom, personal wealth, and public identity, Pendleton's daily life is confined within cold concrete walls, steel doors, and rigid institutional routine. His name, once spoken in hushed tones across covert security circles, exists in public records only as an inmate registration number. In separate federal correctional facilities across the country, the former senior executives of Meridian Global Capital, the CEO, CFO, and head of compliance who paid $80,000 to orchestrate the murder of an honest analyst, continue serving their lengthy prison terms. Their corporate empires have been thoroughly dismantled, and their personal fortunes have been completely liquidated through court-ordered asset forfeitures to fund victim restitution programs, whistleblower legal defense funds, and public cold case research foundations. At Vance Way, in the bustling heart of Toronto's financial district, the bronze memorial sculpture of Marcus Vance stands illuminated against the soaring glass facades of surrounding skyscrapers. On this freezing winter night, fresh white lilies, flickering glass candles, and handwritten notes left by passers-by cover the polished granite base of the monument. Financial workers, commuters, and visitors pause beside the quiet brick corridor, placing their hands against the cold stone and reading the immortal words carved deep into the bronze plaque. "I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing." The dark alleyway where a bullet once silenced a 32-year-old analyst on a cold December night in 2005 has become an eternal sanctuary of truth, courage, and justice. The evidence is permanently preserved in high-tech archives. The laws are etched into international jurisprudence. The corporate conspirators and their hired assassin are locked behind prison bars, and the name of Marcus Vance shines bright and immortal over the city of Toronto forever. The long night is over, the truth has conquered the dark, and justice reigns supreme for all eternity. Part 17. The quiet turn of midnight in late December 2026 brings an eternal, unbroken peace over the city of Toronto. Exactly 21 years after 32-year-old financial analyst Marcus Vance was gunned down in a snow-covered financial alleyway, the case of the 2005 corporate assassination stands completely fulfilled. What began as a cold, terrifying execution on a freezing winter night, followed by 19 years of painful silence, a historic 2024 Touch DNA breakthrough on a discarded paper coffee cup, and the total unmasking of Arthur Pendleton and Meridian Global Capital has reached its definitive, immutable horizon. The narrative is no longer an active criminal investigation, a high-stakes trial, or a legal appeal. It has taken its permanent place as an immortal benchmark in the history of international law enforcement, modern bioinformatics science, and human courage. Inside the quiet, climate-controlled halls of the Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center in downtown Toronto, the specialized task force created during Operation Fallen Whistle operates as a global authority on historical violent crimes. The facility's state-of-the-art laboratories, bathed in the soft glow of automated genomic sequencing suites, process cold case evidence archives gathered from across North America and partner nations worldwide. Forensic geneticists and bioinformaticians utilize hypersensitive, single-cell touch DNA vacuum extraction, spatial transcriptomics, and advanced algorithmic alignment to recover viable biological profiles from microscopic, highly degraded samples once thought completely useless. Faded leather watch straps, aged silk ties, weathered envelopes, and rusted lock picks, physical artifacts from unsolved homicides dating back half a century, are systematically converted into high-resolution genetic profiles. Cross-referenced against public and law enforcement genealogical databases, these profiles continue to unlock cold cases spanning decades, delivering long-awaited truth and peace to grieving families who had spent their lives waiting in dark uncertainty. In the judicial and constitutional realm, appellate courts throughout Canada, the United States, and international jurisdictions consistently uphold the legal framework established during the trial of Arthur Pendleton and the executive board of Meridian Global Capital. Known globally as the Pendleton precedent, the doctrine remains an unassailable pillar of modern jurisprudence. Supreme courts across multiple continents continuously affirm the core legal standard: physical items voluntarily discarded into public receptacles, whether a paper coffee cup, a water bottle, or a food wrapper, constitute legally abandoned property under constitutional law. Provided that law enforcement officers maintain an unbroken, verified chain of custody and adhere to strict judicial oversight, touch DNA recovered from discarded public trash remains fully admissible as primary, direct evidence in capital murder prosecutions. Defense motions attempting to suppress touch DNA evidence gathered through public surveillance are routinely dismissed, forever closing the legal loopholes once exploited by covert contract killers and protected corporate elites. Simultaneously, the global financial and corporate sectors operate under the unyielding, mandatory protection of the Vance compliance protocols. Across every major financial capital, from Bay Street and Wall Street to London, Frankfurt, Singapore, and Tokyo, commercial banks, brokerage firms, and private equity conglomerates maintain cryptographically protected, third-party whistleblower networks built directly into their core operational infrastructure. Internal reporting channels are completely decoupled from executive oversight and board-level intervention, guaranteeing that any financial analyst, auditor, or administrative worker who uncovers money laundering, offshore slush funds, or systemic corruption can transmit evidence directly to federal regulatory authorities without fear of retaliation, professional blacklisting, or physical harm. Operating on automated, immutable audit logs, the system makes it digitally and physically impossible for corporate executives to intercept, edit, or delete reports of internal misconduct. The ultimate sacrifice of Marcus Vance in December 2005 has erected an indestructible fortress of transparency that shields honest professionals across the global economy every single day. In the suburban community of Mississauga, the Vance Memorial Peace Park stands as a thriving, serene sanctuary of community healing, memory, and civic unity. Built directly upon the former residential property of Arthur Pendleton, where the 70-year-old security contractor once hid his illegal arsenal of silenced firearms beneath a false basement workbench, the park's manicured lawns, granite walking paths, and central reflective water pool draw visitors from around the globe. Educational pavilions within the park host daily public workshops, youth leadership seminars, and ethics courses sponsored by the Marcus Vance Foundation for Corporate Integrity and Human Rights. Where a hidden assassin once calculated contract executions in total darkness, local children now play freely under bright, open skies, surrounded by blooming white lilies, leafy oak trees, and the warm laughter of a united community. Inside the maximum security federal penitentiary, where Arthur Joseph Pendleton serves his mandatory life sentence without eligibility for parole, the former contract killer lives in total, permanent obscurity. Stripped of all tactical status, physical freedom, personal wealth, and public identity, Pendleton's daily life is bounded by cold concrete walls, steel security doors, and rigid institutional routines. His name, once spoken in hushed tones across covert security circles, exists in public records only as an inmate registration number. In separate federal correctional facilities across the country, the former senior executives of Meridian Global Capital, the CEO, CFO, and head of compliance who paid $80,000 to orchestrate the murder of an honest analyst, continue serving their lengthy prison sentences. Their corporate empires have been thoroughly dismantled, and their personal fortunes have been completely liquidated through court-ordered asset forfeitures to fund victim restitution programs, whistleblower legal defense funds, and public cold case research foundations. At Vance Way, in the bustling heart of Toronto's financial district, the bronze memorial sculpture of Marcus Vance stands illuminated against the soaring glass facades of surrounding skyscrapers. On this freezing winter night, fresh white lilies, flickering glass candles, and handwritten notes left by passers-by cover the polished granite base of the monument. Financial workers, commuters, and visitors pause beside the quiet brick corridor, placing their hands against the cold stone and reading the immortal words carved deep into the bronze plaque. I am afraid, but I cannot stay quiet. If I let this go, everything I believe in means nothing. The dark alleyway where a bullet once silenced a 32-year-old analyst on a cold December night in 2005 has become an eternal sanctuary of truth, courage, and justice. The physical evidence is permanently archived. The legal precedents are etched into international law. The corporate conspirators and their hired gunmen are locked behind prison bars, and the name of Marcus Vance shines bright and immortal over the city of Toronto forever. The long night is over. The truth has conquered the dark, and justice reigns supreme for all eternity. As midnight settles over the quiet streets of Toronto, an unshakable, timeless calm blankets the city. 21 years after 32-year-old Marcus Vance was murdered in a dark financial alleyway on a freezing December night in 2005, the complete saga of Case File 05-88912 stands fully realized, closed, and preserved for all generations. What began as a terrifying, cold corporate assassination, followed by 19 years of agonizing silence, a groundbreaking 2024 touch DNA breakthrough on a discarded paper coffee cup, and the total unmasking of Arthur Pendleton and the executive board of Meridian Global Capital, has passed into the permanent halls of human history. The case is no longer a matter of active investigation, judicial appeal, or legislative debate. It stands as an eternal beacon of modern forensic science, legal integrity, and individual moral courage. Inside the quiet, high-tech suites of the Forensic Bioinformatics and Cold Case Resolution Center in downtown Toronto, the specialized task force formed during Operation Fallen Whistle operates as an international authority on historical violent crime. The center's state-of-the-art facilities, illuminated by the steady blue glow of automated genomic sequencing units, process cold case evidence archives gathered from across North America and international partner agencies. Forensic geneticists and bioinformaticians utilize hypersensitive, single-cell touch DNA vacuum extraction, spatial transcriptomics, and advanced algorithmic alignment to isolate viable genetic markers from microscopic, highly degraded biological samples once thought completely devoid of trace evidence. Weathered leather watch bands, aged silk ties, faded paper envelopes, and rusted lock picks, physical artifacts from unsolved homicides dating back half a century, are systematically converted into high-resolution genetic profiles. Cross-referenced against public and law enforcement genealogical databases, these profiles continue to unlock cold cases spanning decades, delivering definitive answers and long-awaited peace to grieving families who had spent their lives waiting